TBA.
Sam.
Es que de repente volteó Rosario y me quedé quieto.
Ok,
Y se
ahí
para el
está.
otro lado ahí.
Y Rosario, ay, qué gracioso.
Ajajajaja. Ahí está el link. Ya, Rivera. Do you have it already? That's the link. Okay. So we can change everything at once. I'm going to publish this.
Ya está esto, en live stream.
Okay. No
Vengo.
digan nada, no digan nada. No digan nuestros secretos.
Voy a probar aquí afuera.
No, Gaby, no empieces.
Sí.
No. Ok. Ahorita nos ayudas tú, Saúl. Ahorita que empecemos, subes el link a social media. Sí, Saúl, ¿estás ahí? ¿Me escuchas? ¿Cambio? Saúl se me hace que no me está escuchando, ¿verdad? ¿O sí?
¿Quién sabe? A lo mejor está en el otro canal.
Ok. Saúl, ¿estás ahí?
Ok. Ok, la presentación está funcionando bien. Voy por mi café. Ahorita vengo.
Ok. Entonces...
¿Me hablaban?
Sí, Saúl. Ahorita que empecemos, tú puedes compartir el live stream en social media.
Sí.
Ok.
Sí. Abro HotSuite de una vez.
¿Sabes qué? Tengo un problema ahorita con HotSuite. Me saca y me saca y me saca. Según yo ya la publiqué. ¿Puedes meterte a ver si es cierto?
Sí. Déjame ver toda.
La que pusiste anoche.
Sí, sí, está.
¿Ahí está?
Sí.
Ajá, ok. Ok, entonces eso ya está. Ahorita ya nomás empezando. Nomás empezandito. Pones el post del live streaming.
Sí.
Y ¿qué más teníamos pendiente? Bueno, el website falta. Okay, so that live Rivera that I see here is right now, right?
Yes, click on it.
Tengo miedo. It's downloading. Ahí me estoy viendo. That's my shirt today, so that should be it. Okay, let me take this off because I'm not gonna. Qué padre. Okay, we have it. So website is up. Do you have upload? Or do you want me to see them first? Or are they up already?
You cut off. Sorry, could you repeat that?
The summaries that you received yesterday, are they uploaded somewhere
Yeah.
or not yet?
They're on the drive, and the link to it is in Slack.
Okay, let me see if I can just let me check them pretty quick. And okay, hold on, because if they're ready, we can upload them and have them there for people to read them. Which, you know, we should. Oh, they're big. You know what, Jesus? Let's do it. Let's upload the summaries to panel 1 and panel 2
Okay.
to those links that we have there. And
Do we want to reformat or as is?
let me see who's in the waiting room. I'm reading the first one. Let me read the second one. This is good stuff. I need to read this for final remarks.
Is Gabby there?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jesus. So we are good in terms of website. Let me translation. What is terms of international agenda?
There's an email from James asking to update his PowerPoint.
On the binational waters email? Let me see.
Your personal email and Gabby's.
My personal email? Okay, let me see. Oh, damn it. Why does he want to do that right now? Gabby is not even here. Gabby, are you there? Author attributions on several slides. Would it be possible to substitute the attached version of the slides in this morning's panel 4? Gabby, are you there? We might not. I mean, we have 7 minutes. I'm not going to risk it. Let me look for it. Probably Gabby can just instead of replacing, just add that information. USGS, Caligari. I think it's just Caligari. Macandu.
I'm back.
Gabby, can you hear us? Rodríguez.
¿Qué onda? ¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué problema tenía Rosario?
Ahorita, el problema de ahorita es que James mandó sus PowerPoints updated, pero aparentemente solo son las referencias a unas imágenes que está usando. Quiero ver si Gaby las puede agregar, pero Gaby se fue a tomar café. Entonces, no sé si va a haber tiempo, porque realmente no vamos a tener un tiempo. Gaby no puede dejar de compartir.
Bueno.
Entonces, si no lo podemos hacer ahorita en caliente, we're not going to be able to do it. Gaby, déjame mandar un mensaje.
Sam, creo que Elia está en la sala de espera.
Déjala castigada un ratito. Oye, hoy me desperté muy molestón, fíjate.
Ya sé.
No, en serio. Usualmente no soy molestón, pero hoy amanecí, qué bárbaro, ¿eh? No, hombre.
James y Sarita ya están en sus canales, ¿verdad? Ellos.
Sí.
Yo no puedo ver a quién está aquí conectado.
Ok, yo me voy a pasar de una vez al canal al español
Ujú.
para
Sí,
no
ahí
tener
está Jane Harkins. Siento a Cristo de la capilla.
cualquier cosa, pues me escriben porque ya no los voy a escuchar hasta que inicie.
Gracias, Saúl, nos vemos.
Hola James, ¿te escucho?
Ujú,
Wait, yep.
ujú. Yeah, it is working.
Hola James. Sí, estoy en el español. Perfecto.
Sam, ¿me estás oyendo?
¿Qué pasó?
Hay un
Man-
problema, tengo un problema con mi Zoom, se me quiere cerrar. Voy a salir y entrar, ¿ok?
Sí,
¿Me dejas entrar, please?
yep, sí,
Ahí
clear and
voy.
out. Sí, nos vemos ahorita, Rosario.
Se está tardando mucho esto, no sé qué le pasa.
Ayer me pasó lo mismo. Ahí está,
Sam,
bendita.
¿quién? ¿Me escuchan? Hola.
Leave.
Sí,
¿Hay alguien grabando la
Rivera,
versión en
please
inglés?
tell Gabby what we need to do with James
yo
Caligari.
empecé, pero puedes grabarla tú también.
Me da miedo esto, a ver.
Rosario, perdón, es que estoy escuchando a Sam y a Elia hablar, pero no te entendí. ¿Me lo repites?
Checa tu correo. Hay
Es que
hay
ahorita,
unos cambios en la presentación de James. Solamente agrega unas referencias, porfa, sin que dupliques, sin que tengas que sustituir slides.
¿Cuáles referencias?
Checa tu
creo que
mail.
están en el correo. Ujú.
Ah,
Sam, voy a hacer referencia a las calaveritas. Entonces vas a tener
Sí.
que poner el link de las calaveritas. Ahí está ya el website.
Ujú.
Y también voy a
Ujú.
hacer referencia a las summaries de los moderadores, que también ya está ahí.
¿quiere que le
Ujú.
pongamos el logo?
Las referencias, Gaby. Es que no me puedo salir, Sam. No me deja salirme.
Estoy viendo la presentación que mandó, pero no tiene referencias.
Sí, sí vienen ahí en las imágenes.
Rosario, te quedaste freeze. ¿Quieres que yo te saque?
Sí, sí, por favor, sácame.
Voy,
Córreme. Porque
voy,
no puedo salirme, no me hace caso la compu.
voy.
Ya les vi. Ujú.
¿Puedes hacer
Voy.
copy-paste de eso, Gaby, sin tener que sustituir slides?
Déjame ver. James Caligari, ¿verdad?
Sí, está en el último panel.
Ujú.
Digo, si se puede, si no, pues ni modo. Sácame, Sam, no puedo
Sí,
salir.
ahí voy.
Bueno, este sí tiene.
¿Dónde está la Rosario?
Ok.
So the equipment just arrived yesterday. The equipment just arrived yesterday. So in case you want to start going over that, but you can always.
Ok. ¿Por qué nos hacen esto? A ver.
Sí.
Sam, se me hace que Rosario perdió la señal y está en la espera otra vez. Ya está.
No, aquí estoy. Aquí estoy ya.
Bueno. Ay,
¿Me haces co-host again?
sí, voy. Pobrecita, te tenía como en 3 lugares o 2. Estoy muy raro.
Sí, no, algo empezó a pasar aquí, falló. Elia, ¿ya estás grabando? Yo creo que hay que empezar a grabar. ¿Sí? ¿En inglés?
Or logging.
Gracias. En español, Saúl, ¿estás grabando?
Y el-
Ok. Me está pidiendo Alfonso Rivera que si lo dejamos entrar.
Ujú.
Déjame.
Voy.
Ya lo dejé entrar. Voy a admitir pues nomás porque es moderador.
Ujú. Veamos esto.
A Rick, voy a admitir a Rick. Es keynote speaker ahorita.
Sí. De hecho, yo creo que ya deberíamos de empezar a dejar entrar a todos. Ya son las 8.
Acéptalos a todos, sí.
Ok, ya agregué lo que hacía falta.
Gracias, Gaby.
Ujú.
Ahora sí podemos poner un minutito de music.
Sí.
En lo que empezamos. Vamos a necesitar el link de las calaveras, link de los summaries. ¿Sí tienes el link de los summaries? El link del el nuevo link del live stream.
Let me get those.
Yo soy como el chile verde
Llorona. Pero sabroso.
Yo soy como el chile verde llorona picante.
Ok, somos
De mi llorona,
azul.
llorona, y llévame al río. De mi
Esperamos un minutito más a que Sam esté listo.
llorona, y llévame al río.
Tenemos yo creo que ya podemos compartir, Saúl, en redes, el live stream channel.
Llorona, porque me muero de frío. Tápame con tu rebozo, llorona, porque me muero de frío.
Qué curioso, se me bloqueó ahorita mi.
Sí.
Qué bueno que me salí a tiempo.
Manco. Work it.
¿Sí?
Mhm.
We're good to go. 5, 3, 2, 1, 0. Action. Not yet. Gaby, ¿tú estás lista? Sí, Elia, ¿tú estás lista? ¿No? Ese fue un sí, ese fue un no. ¿Estás en el canal de español? Mira, Chris. Hola, Chris. ¿Cómo estás?
Gracias,
Morning,
gracias.
everyone.
Muy bien, saludos a todos.
Buenos
Hello,
días.
Chris.
Buenos días.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hola.
Jeff, Mary, Rick,
Texas.
Alfonso.
It's
Good morning.
10 a.m. here.
Hey,
Morning,
Jane.
Mary.
Good seeing you, Jane.
I don't know what time is it?
Good morning.
Gilbert.
Where is Rick? I know Rick is there somewhere. Rick, our keynote speaker, if you can hear me, can you tell me how to pronounce your last name? Rick,
I
good
can.
morning. Or good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's almost dinner time.
I know.
Yeah. No, it's fine. Whatever way you want to pronounce it, like Haji Boom, but it should be Hogeboom with the
Hogeboom.
Hogeboom. Yeah.
I'm gonna mess it anyways.
Yeah, it's fine. It simply translates to high tree, so it's actually quite common.
Okay.
So Rick Hogeboom.
Palo Alto.
Palo Alto. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very expensive. Palo Alto, California.
Hmm?
Oh, yeah.
Very expensive place. Okay, chicos.
Yeah, let's get going.
Yeah. Let's get going. Okay, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Some places else. This is our second day of the US-Mexico Transboundary Groundwater Conference. I'm going to start. Thank you for being here today. We are already almost 90 people this morning, so it's awesome. Yesterday we have a pretty busy, very exciting day, and the afternoon was not less exciting. It was pretty fun. For those who stayed for the happy hour, it really was a happy hour. Really fun. We will have that live streaming video from all the day yesterday, probably in a couple of days. We're working on some production things, but we had a very, very interesting content that we will share, and we will try to encapsulate that as a summary at the end of the day today. But before going to that and to our first keynote speaker for today, let me just go to some instructions, because we all need to do that, especially when we're relying so much on technology. First, language. If you want to speak in English, please select on your interpretation icon on the bottom of your screen, English, and then be sure to select mute original audio. Please do that. If you want to speak in Spanish, please make sure you select Spanish first, and then again, mute your original audio. That way we can hear you in the channel that you want to speak on, in the language that you have selected. That's the first instruction for today. Second, all the PowerPoints, all presentations are ready for you to go in the agenda. They were there yesterday, they are there today. The summaries of the two panels that we had yesterday are already uploaded in the website as well on their conference materials. You can look at the summaries there too, PowerPoints, and of course our calaveritas from yesterday. Let us remember the objective that brought us in here today: to explore and analyze innovative, we need to think outside the box, perspectives of transboundary groundwater resources management between Mexico and the United States, and identify strategies to assess current and future transboundary conditions from a legal, technical, I will add, environmental and managerial perspectives. So yesterday, I'm going to just do a pretty quick recap from yesterday. We had our opening remarks from our co-host from Mexico, IMTA, and the director of IMTA gave us a pretty interesting talk yesterday, or opening remarks. Of course, from Texas, John Tracy, director of Texas Water Resources Institute, and our IBWC commissioner, Jane Harkins, also gave us a message, which I think is what we need. I mean, we explore. I think the highlights from yesterday is that we what it means, this conference, in terms of binational agenda, the momentum that we're living right now, what we need to concentrate on, and how and what we have been able to accomplish in this conference. We're going to be able to do that at the end of the day, but also the way forward. Where should we go from here? And we are planning a couple of things at the end of the day to let you know, but this is not going to be the end. This is just the beginning. This conference is just the beginning of what we are trying to get to with this conference, because it's not a conference, it's an effort. It's the largest truly binational effort that I've been witnessed so far. I'm not young. So I don't know for you, but for us has been really a pleasure to see that even though we are limited by geography and by travel and by person contact, we've been blessed by the capacity of technology at the same time to join both Mexico and the US, the border region, truly half and half, and speak of what we think are the issues that we need to concentrate on. If we have had this event in person, we probably would have, if it was in Mexico, we will have 50 Mexicans and 10 from the US. If it were in the US, we will have 50 person from the US and 10 from Mexico. So this gave us the possibility to really be half and half, truly have all the perspectives from both sides at the same time, and not at the same place geographically, but all at the same place virtually. So that's what we have achieved so far, and I think that's great by itself. So Gabby here is pushing me to move forward. Another thing that we had yesterday is the competition of calaveritas, and I want to share with you our winners. Sharon Megdal, and I hope you're there, Sharon. That's your calaverita. And Gilbert Anaya. It was wonderful. I mean, we all should, and you should do this in English too, Gilbert. We had lots of fun yesterday. We had customs and stuff, and I really appreciate all the participation and the people that stayed that late with us to share with this. It was awesome. Sharon, I see you're there. So even though Samuel run this voting that was everything but democratic, of course, because he didn't allow us to participate, the organizing committee was not able to vote. So I think it was truly unfair. But anyway, I think the winners were going to be the winners anyway. So there, and those are the second place calaveritas. If you want to look at all of them, please go to the website under calaveritas and you'll see all of them. They're pretty fun and pretty amazing. Anyway, so let's get started. I'm going to introduce again Sam Sandoval. He's going to be our Q&A moderator for today, as he was for yesterday. He's associate professor in water resources management at University of California, Davis, and associate director of the Permanent Forum of Binational Waters. Thank you, Sam, again, for making all this possible. You are our manager or bodyguard. And
just one thing, super quick comment. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. Also for the respect and engagement that you have had yesterday and that you had today. I think it looks speaks very high of all of us that we can be so many people here and all of us interacting and being respectful. So thanks a lot. That's been super good, and I'm really looking forward for today. Send me your cues, your comments, your questions. I'll put them for the speakers. Thanks.
Yes, I forgot to mention that. If you have any question, please put it in the chat. We will send it to their speakers, and Sam will help us to do that. So let's start. Let's start with the good stuff for today, which is going to be very exciting, especially for me personally. I love these topics of today. The first keynote speaker of today, we're going to talk about the role of financial institutions in sustainable transboundary water management. I'm sure some of you will be wondering, why do we need financial institutions involved in this topic? Well, because we're looking for options, innovative options, and we need money too. So I'm going to read you via Rick Hajibum. Close enough. Okay, he is executive director at the Water Footprint Network, an international expertise center based in the Netherlands. He uses the water footprint concept to promote the transition towards sustainable, fair, and efficient use of the world's fresh water. He is also assistant professor at the University of Twente, the Netherlands, where he studies water allocation strategies in relation to water scarcity and potential response options for actors involved, including consumers, businesses, NGOs, governments, and investors. Thank you, Rick, for being with us today, and please take over. The floor is yours.
My pleasure. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Yes, thanks, Rosario, for this platform. And thank you all for joining me today. When I got the invitation, and we also could see it like a second ago on the objective of the conference, I learned that the conference is about exploring innovative perspectives on transboundary groundwater management resources. So in the next 20 minutes, I would like to share with you some insights from a perspective of an overlooked, perhaps even an enigmatic actor, you might say, in the water space, namely financial institutions, and contemplate a bit what the role might be that they play or can play or should play in solving some of the water issues that we face. Water issues at large, I must say, not just transboundary groundwater issues. And as the bio stated, I'm both with the Water Footprint Network, an international network and expertise center, to which IMTA, by the way, is also a member. And I'm active as a researcher in academia. So I am not an insider to the financial sector myself. I'm a water guy. But nevertheless, I hope I can share some insights from the financial world based on some work that I did, both on the academic side, drawing from a recent study on this topic, and on the practical side, working alongside some major financial institutions to improve and implement water-wise investment policies. Next slide, please. I will start with a bit of context on water footprint assessment so that you can understand where I am coming from, and hopefully this context also helps clarify the definition of water sustainability, which I use as the basis for an assessment framework that we developed for investors. And then I would like to focus on some general lessons that we learned of a Dutch case study where we applied the framework to, and conclude with my outlook on the future role of investors in the water space. Next slide, please. So I'm active in the field of water footprint assessment. In short, we investigate how much water we use, is used by farms, firms, families to produce food, feed, fuel, and fiber, and explore whether that water use is sustainable or not, and what we can do to improve. So you may have heard figures like you need 140 liters of water to produce a cup of coffee, or 8,000 liters to produce a pair of jeans. Those are typical numbers that emerge from this research community. And the field has, over the course of, say, the last 15 years, developed into two branches. The first is the scholarly field that really studies the human appropriation of water resources. And secondly, there's the community of practitioners that helps businesses assess water risks in and across their supply chains, their value chains. Both branches come together, you might say, in the water footprint assessment standard, which aims to provide a science-based method, a taxonomy, so you will, to make sure that governments, companies, and investors who use it all make use of the same standard definitions and calculation methods when they study their water use and pollution. So the next slide we give some examples of the basis of water footprint accounting, the process of actually calculating how much water we need for particular human activities, so that we know how much water we use when and where and what for. And these maps show, for instance, the total global water footprint of humanity by color or by source on the left, where green means water that is consumed from rainwater or soil moisture, if you will, blue from surface water and groundwater, and gray as a measure for pollution. But we can also break it down per sector. So that's what the right-hand side shows, the total human use for agricultural, industrial, or household use. So that's the accounting, the first step in water footprint assessment. And the next slide, please. Knowing these footprints is useful, insightful, but they become more meaningful when we place them in the proper context, which in water footprint assessment we've referred to as the sustainability assessment. Now, sustainability we identify typically along 4 dimensions. The first is environmental sustainability, where we look at criteria that check whether the total water use remains within ecological thresholds. So are we not harming nature or ecosystems? Economic efficiency then deals with whether we are not using more water than necessary. Are we wasting it? And it investigates targets to avoid this waste of water. Social equity then is less well operationalized, but it is about getting an idea on whether all the competing users or communities are granted a fair share of the water pie. And finally, resource security considers the dependencies on foreign water resources. And I'll get into that a little bit later on. So yes, thank you. Next slide, please. Indeed. So from the sustainability research, we already know that this water footprint of humanity that I showed earlier in many places is environmentally unsustainable, meaning that in the red areas of this map, we are actually using more water than we should, hurting ecosystems as we go, or depleting groundwater resources, aquifers beyond renewal rates. Now, for investors, it is critical that they are mindful of where they employ new activities. Next slide, please. Aside from using too much water, causing scarcity, we also know that we are wasting enormous amounts of water, mostly needlessly, unfortunately. And this map traces the water footprint of wheat, where it is grown globally. And in the green areas, producers need roughly 600 liters to produce a ton of product, whereas in the red areas, producers need more than double that amount to produce that same ton of wheat. And that has mainly to do with inefficient irrigation practices, inefficient farming practices. So also as an investor, how do you know if your portfolio activities are not wasting water? Do you encourage potential investees to save water, to use best available practices in terms of water use and pollution? Next, please. The third pillar or criterion for sustainability is shown in this map, which tries to give an insight on how water resources are shared from a consumption perspective. It shows the water footprint per person based on how much water is needed to produce all the goods and services that a person consumes. You see the United States all the way on the right as a dubious leader of the pack with the highest footprint per capita. And this number varies greatly across countries. It depends on dietary composition, on affluence, on the local energy mix, etc. And not sharing water resources fairly may, of course, lead to all kinds of adverse societal effects, of which, as an investor, you would want to know that you are not a part of this or catalyzing this. And for the next slide, please, you can see that, oh, one more, sorry. Next slide, please. Yeah, that companies, let alone investors, are not always considerate of such social issues. You, of course, know very well, mindful of the Constellation situation earlier this year. Remember how this was a major issue prior to the other Corona issue taking over? I think it was in a week when the global economy more or less locked down. But even here, we see a clear connection emerge with investors, right? As the decisions to protect local water resources for other uses helped build awareness with investors to take better heed of water issues related to their investments, to give it a positive twist. Next slide, please. Yes. So the last sustainability dimension highlights the global connection of water. It's not technically a criterion for sustainability. It's more an artifact of the globalized economy. And it lays bare how dependent we are on foreign water resources. As trade has physically separated the consumption locations from where the products are produced, the water used to produce those commodities is virtually traded to with these trade flows. So I looked it up for Mexico and the United States, and I found that even though there is in monetary terms, Mexico has an export surplus with the United States, this map here shows by the red color of Mexico that there is actually a major deficit in the water trade balance. And Mexico greatly depends on the United States water resources through the reliance of mostly agricultural imports, and mainly then corn, soy, and meat products. And in fact, Mexico saves an 83 giga cubic meters per year because of this trade. That's with all countries, by the way, not just the US. While the United States loses some 94 giga cubic meters per year because they are a net exporter of virtual water. Well, likewise, investors may want to know how dependent their portfolios are on foreign or far away resources. Next slide, please. Okay, that was a lot of context, I know, but it all comes together in a framework that we developed that applies to investors. So don't worry, I was getting there. Because we really wanted to take a closer look at the role that investors play in the water space. Did their investments enable overusage or wastage or unequal sharing of limited resources? How active are they on preventing such issues? And specifically, we wanted to find out how investors incorporate sustainability criteria in their investment decisions. Next slide, please. We therefore developed an assessment framework. It consists of 9 different categories along the 3, or it rests on the 3 main dimensions of sustainability I just described earlier. And behind these categories are sets of questions that an investor could ask, or maybe better, should ask, prospective investees, that is companies. So the bottom 3 categories reflect the efficient water use, environmental sustainability, and social equity. And these are each split in a part that addresses the direct operations of the companies that an investor invests in, and a supply chain part. And for most companies, the lion's share of water consumption and pollution is in their supply chain, right? So it really is crucial to take a supply chain focus here as well. Now, you can only substantiate this core of efficient, sustainable, and equitable water use if you know what claim a prospective activity will put on local water resources, right? So accounting for water use, doing the actual measuring is therefore important. That's the category of accounting that's on top there. And finally, really on top is the category of disclosure, and that allows the general public to hold investors accountable, to facilitate debate over water issues, and conveniently also to help us base our scores on for our framework. Because behind these categories, there are questions in each category that result in a score. And again, these questions are questions that an investor's policy should be able to answer about prospective investees. Now, we selected some 20 of the largest investors in the Netherlands as a case study to apply this case study, this framework to: banks, pension funds, insurance companies. And we scored them based on their publicly disclosed policy documents. So we went through endless environment, social governance analysis, ESG for short, that's what they call it, annual reports, CSR reports, sustainability assessments, triple bottom line studies, etc., trying to find answers to 50 or so water-related indicators that are behind this framework. If for the next slide, we can see how this ended up with a scoring and a ranking. Now, you may not recognize the names of these financial institutions listed here, but these are the largest in the Netherlands. They don't get bigger, sorry. And the colors correspond actually to the categories in the assessment framework, right? And the number behind each bar shows the percentage score out of a total of 100. Now, for the sake of time, I will not go into too much detail now, but the thing that you will probably notice if you look at this is the total scores are really low. Even the top scoring investors have a very low score, and this illustrates that financial institutions are very much lacking clear and meaningful water policies, right? They do score some points on disclosure and reporting. That's the gray category to the left, but that's readily doable, right? And that in and of itself doesn't guarantee that what they write down in this policy is actually meaningful or intelligent. So accounting, the orange or the brown categories, also score some points, but mainly in operations only. So they don't really look across the fence lines of the companies that they invest in. The supply chain part is really being overlooked by most investors. So those are just some general observations. Maybe for Q&A we can go a bit deeper, but for now, can we shift to the next sheet? So we can focus a little bit on some of the lessons that we learned from surveying inspectors and from the perspective of investors on water. First, we saw many good intentions being expressed across many investor policy documents. That has to be said. And by and large, they really want to address water in their investment policies. But, and that's the second point, their current performance is still really subpar. And their policy is fragmented, it's incomplete, bits and pieces are written all over the place, which in part has to do with the enormous complexity of the sector. But they also often emphasize the wrong or insignificant things. For instance, installing water efficient toilets at the investor headquarters is definitely a praiseworthy exercise. It even got you some points in our scoring, but it truly addressing water sustainability clearly goes quite a bit beyond such minor contributions at home. We also saw a lot of confusion with investors who understood water sustainability as investing in the water sector. So they don't see that virtually every company depends on water for either its direct operations or its supply chains. and that it is those considerations they should be targeting in any sector, right? Not just in infrastructure works like treatment facilities. Another discrepancy we found had to do with risk management. Now, financial folks love to talk about risk. Risk is the language they breathe and speak. So they almost automatically frame water sustainability as a business risk. And the problem for them then is that unsustainable water practices, such as depleting groundwater reserves, at the moment hardly affect their bottom line. The water risks do not materialize yet. Not enough at least to wake them up, not enough to justify spending time and money mitigating further impacts, not enough to demand investees to up their game in regards of their water performance. So as water folks, and I will address you now as water folks, I think we are concerned not with this narrow risk management perspective only, but rather with the proper functioning of the entire water system, right? Including its societal and economic dependencies and dimensions. So that we really found as a major issue is how this lack of mutual understanding and exchange between the investor community on the one hand and the water management community on the other really inhibited the development of sound, practical, science-based water investment practices. Next slide, please. So what then? What's next? How can we improve the investor water performance? Well, first, I would like to emphasize again the undeniable growth in interest from the financial sector in water issues. You may have seen there are more and more impact or green bonds being brought to market and other seemingly sustainable investment products. We were approached also by many of the investors that we investigated in this case study afterward to sit with them and to help them improve. Motivation is not always intrinsic, to be clear. Pressure from asset owners, regulators, and the general public as well also helps build the urgency for them. But the general trend, I would say, is good and upward, which on the other hand, of course, is about time. Because after all, investors are a very powerful actor group that is somehow only just now starting to assert itself in the water arena. Because mind you, investment decisions made in the boardrooms of investors today profoundly influence the state and shape of tomorrow's water resources. And newly built thirsty businesses will be thirsty for decades to come. Secondly, as we then, as the water community know all too well, pressures on water resources around the globe are growing as we are approaching the boundaries of what the natural systems can carry or sustain. And it is therefore also evident that not only these water risks for businesses and investors will materialize more often and at higher expenses than they do now, but also that risk exposure is going to grow. And investors increasingly see these growing risks. But they would need to start understand the essence of sustainability, which they do more and more, which is that they have to assume a long-term horizon here. And in order to do that, they really have to make a mind shift here away from the rather short-range financial performance that preoccupies much of today's market to ensure continued business operations and profitability in the long run as well. Now they mostly just tick the box for water indicators. So what we saw is that in less than half a day spent, their environmental analysts can sign off water performance of investments worth over $100 million. Think about that. In just half a day, $100 million worth of investment can be labeled water sustainable. That is not due diligence. Then you don't know what's happening in the water sphere. And investors start to see that they don't have the full picture here in terms of water. So while we see that there is much to be gained in the awareness raising with investors, we also see that there are some further ahead of the pack. And they are now starting to demand prospective investees, companies, to provide them with clear water accounts. Show them how much water do you need? How much water do you pollute? And the next logical step then would be that they require these companies to set targets and to meet those targets. Substantiated, quantitative water reduction targets. But, and there I think is the major challenge that has to be overcome, remains that is that we have to assign these targets high enough weight, these water targets, so that they actually influence the investment decisions that are made among all the other indicators, key performance indicators that investors use to decide on whether or not to invest in something. In any case, I can assure you that they cannot do this alone. So we, as the water community here, also, I think, need to join forces with financial institutions, as water is here to stay. I hope that somehow you, from your capacity, can also contribute and consider the perspective of investors in your work, if that allows for it. And in the next slide, please. We also will keep that work going, both via the academic inquiry and through the engagement with the Water Footprint Network. Now, the network depends on your insights as well, and donations to continue further its mission of fair and smart use of water worldwide. So I would like to close with the invitation to join the network, donate to the network, either through your organization or on your personal account. That's all I have. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. Yeah, these are just some bonus slides in case difficult questions come up. So
Thank you, Rick. Very, very interesting. And we do have a couple of questions there.
We have
Sammy,
more
you
than
want
a
to take
couple of
over?
questions.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions, so I'm glad you were wrapping up.
I hope that's not because I wasn't clear enough. I know I can talk quite fast when I get enthusiastic about something. So sorry for the translators.
So I put some of the questions on the chat, but let's actually start with. There's a good
come
question.
Closer to your screen.
Yeah, so there is a good question from Randy Hanson.
Do you need me to look at the chat as well, or Sam, will you give me
a
question?
I can give you the question.
Thanks.
Okay. Why do you classify inefficiency that could include irrigation inefficiency as undesirable? In many agricultural areas, this is the major form of recharge and an avenue for water reuse.
Yeah, so the beginning of the question, I see.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Can you repeat the beginning of the question, please?
Yeah.
So why we list that as unsustainable practice?
No, unsustainable and efficient, and pretty much what Randy's saying, that the using some inefficient irrigation systems may add recharge, or maybe the primary source of recharge for different places, and just a different way to redoing it.
No, sure, yeah, that's absolutely the case. I think the more fundamental question perhaps is if we should emphasize the benefits that come with an actually undesirable situation, because if it is inefficient use, then I think that there is an imperative to address the inefficiencies, even though there may be a silver lining in doing that in terms of recharge. So one of the means we try to operationalize this also is to identify a plausible amount of water that is needed to produce an agricultural commodity or a product, and use that as a reference, as a benchmark for producers to adhere to. I think that would be the ideal practice, but you are right that may come at a cost in the current system, at least, to reduced recharge. Yes, but I think the more fundamental question is, do we want to maintain inefficiencies in the system?
Let's go to another question from Debbie. Is there any movement by shareholders and the NGO community to push for more accounting on water use, similar to the divestment push?
Yes, certainly. We really see a difference, and that's also maybe in the variability we saw in the scores across the different institutions, financial institutions. And there actually we also saw a divide where the more visible financial institutions, such as banks, but also pension funds, they are because of their public nature, are more subject to scrutiny of their their shareholders, but also of clients. In case of banks, if you store your deposits at a bank, then you want that bank to invest your money wisely. So they have this push much stronger, for instance, than insurance companies. They are not so much in the public picture, so they don't really have this push from their clients to operate water sustainably or even broader in a broader context in a sustainable manner. And of course, within each category, you will have laggards and front runners. So some really want to make an effort, and some yeah, you could say just do whatever they need to, well, call it greenwashing or make sure they keep up. So yes, that push is definitely there from shareholders and from the general public. Yeah.
One other question that I think that Chris Scott mentions, that I think it puts things in good context. Mexico's virtual water exports to the US are largely blue water, groundwater and surface water irrigation, while the US exports to Mexico are largely green water, rainfall in the Midwest and East for corn and beef. Can you comment?
Yeah, that's very good to dive into the division of the colors. I didn't do that. I lumped it as the total footprint. So I don't know the composition by heart, but I trust that this is indeed true. So yeah, it may be useful to look at the split between green and blue water in the trade balances. Perhaps, and I don't know if this might be clear to the person asking the question, but in effect, blue water use is usually filling up a deficiency in green water, right? If there's not enough rainwater, then we need to apply some irrigation to make sure that there's well, even an output, for instance, in agriculture. So therefore, I would just emphasize the importance of green water, maybe with respect to blue water, because it might be that since the traditional focus of water managers has been on blue water so much, green water is often overlooked or maybe belittled a little bit as important. But I would say both are important, but certainly making the distinction from might be important as long as it doesn't do away with the importance of green water.
One other question. This is from Alan Valle. So what variables should be taken into account to evaluate the efficiency in water management? For example, water demand, availability, productivity, human population growth, etc. Could you comment?
Yes, so these are all aspects that, again, the beginning of the question?
What variables should be taken into account?
Okay, so should be, of course, there's the normative aspect that makes it very hard. Is there a should be? We try to, at least in this context, for instance, for this framework for investors, but also in a more broader aspect, in general, we say we need to cover the dimensions of social equity, environmental sustainability, and economic resource use efficiency as a general overarching principle to define sustainability. Which indicators or which variables exactly to include? Yeah, that's open, I would say, for debate for each context. Also, how much weight you put to that. And of course, well, maybe for a more pragmatic reason, if you can actually find data to substantiate those. So we struggled with that quite a bit, that we came up with 56 indicators, I think, that are behind this framework, in this case that we used. But for some, it's really hard to find like data to do an actual scoring on. So I suppose you can make it as complete as you will by including as many variables as you will on productivity, on population growth, etc. But I can maybe also, if to tie it back to this, eventually investors have so many different indicators, not only on water. I mean, I referred shortly to environment, social, and governance. So basically the three sustainability domains, if you will, or the non-financial indicators. There's like 100 different indicators. It goes from deforestation to child labor to corruption and mismanagement, all of that, So water for them is just one minor, tiny line in this whole thing. And we, as expert in water, might want to make it very complex, but in the communication and in the translation, I think the challenge is much more in trying to, without losing all the nuance, but still getting the message across, is probably at this point more important than being comprehensive and complete. Because they will get lost in the details.
So let me actually push a little bit here. There are two very good questions, one shorter, one longer. So the first one, shorter, is from Agustin Breña. Basically what he says, you are showing results from Dutch financial institutions. Are there similar assessments performed by other countries? Are they following this example? Earlier this year, BlackRock announced that sustainability will be incorporated into portfolio design making. Do you think this could catalyze this type of assessment worldwide, even in FIs from emerging economies like Mexico? So any other places that you're seeing, and this is a common trend?
No, absolutely. I think investors are looking like crazy to find how they can, well, substantiate or give shape to their sustainable, well, image and investment practices. BlackRock, of course, being a major player to announce to become more sustainable, but they still struggle very much what this means. And if they give hands and feet to these kinds of policies, I would say 95% focuses on carbon and climate change kind of sustainability indicators. So water is not too high on the agendas yet, but it is definitely growing. Actually, as we speak, we are in a partnership with, for instance, the CDP. The CDP is the disclosure project where companies report mainly for the interest of investors on all kinds of sustainability indicators, including water. So we are working with the CDP to get some of these indicators in their new frameworks as well. We do this through the UN high-level panel on water as well in the Valuing Water Initiative. You may have heard of that. All to further this cause. There's the science-based targets networks. The EU specifically is working on a taxonomy for financial institutions where water will play a major role as well. So there is certainly a lot of activity to get this out there. But I must also say, if I'm a bit critical here, that the depth that is attained in these assessments so far, or the criteria that they use, are still too superficial. So there, we of course want to push to have it a little bit more substantial, give it a bit more body. And I suppose that when these standards are broadly accepted, and whether or not that outlet would be a CDP or a Pacific Institute or any UN organization or EU, then I suppose that goes both for developing and for emerging markets.
One last super quick question, and I don't want to close with this. This is from David Granville. What is your view of water stewardship as a guide for investors, and particularly the Alliance for Water Stewardships as a water stewardship standard, which has its own certification and labeling? Can this provide the guidance that investors need, or is it too limited?
Both is the shortest answer. Yeah, no, I think it's the work the Alliance for Water Stewardship doing is great. Mostly what they do is certifying production sites. So I think that they still can make some steps in also addressing the broader, how do you say that, corporate impact through supply chains as well, rather than just the sites. And I think this is therefore also still very much on the corporate level or on the company level, rather than addressing the investors who invest in those companies. But these would certainly be great vehicles to use. So I certainly applaud all the work the Alliance for Water Stewardship is doing. But since they don't immediately target the investors, I'm afraid it will be too much of a niche for investors to see them as at this moment at least, as the place to be and the place to get the solutions from.
Yeah. Yeah, this was a very lively discussion. I think we should get going. Don't get that back, but definitely thanks, Rick. Thanks for sharing this with us.
No, absolutely, my pleasure. So.
Rosario. Rosario, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Rick, very much. Hope you can stay with us the rest of the day. Hopefully it's not too late by then in England. We surely have more to discuss on this. The Netherlands. I'm sorry.
One other thing, the chat is super lively. Guys, you wake up super chatty, which is good. I'll keep an eye on that one, and thanks for everyone for the discussion.
Yes, if you have more questions, I'm sure there are more questions to you, Rick, and we will have them, and they're in the chat, and we can post them there on the blog as well to follow up the discussion on this, because this is a never-ending topic, as all the topics that we have been talking about. So thank you. And we're going to go now with our discussion panel number 3, the first one of the day. Potential models of transboundary groundwater management, my favorite topic. It's finally here. I mean, I love the other topics, but this one is the one that brings up the passion. So our moderator for this panel is Dr. Gabriel Eckstein, expert advisor and consultant on U.S. and international environmental and water law issues. Research focused on natural resources and environmental issues at both the national and international levels, as well as on the interrelationship of law and science. Thank you, Gabriel, as always, for being here, part of this. And I'm going to give you now the floor to present your panelists. So go ahead.
All right, thank you, Rosario. It's a real pleasure to be here with everybody. I know we're running a little bit late, so we'll get right to it. We are going to start with the introduction of the speakers. If we can have the slide with the background of the speakers. All right, so we're going to go in this order, starting with Alfonso Rivera. And I believe this is a little bit outdated because I believe Alfonso is now retired. He was the chief hydrogeologist of the Geological Survey of Canada and the chairman, he's still the chairman of the International Association of Hydrogeologists Transboundary Aquifers Commission. And he is also the author and editor of the book, Canada's Groundwater Resources, that was published in 2014. Our next speaker is going to be Francesco Sindico, the co-director of the Strathclyde Center for the Environmental Law and Governance program at the University of Strathclyde Law School in Glasgow, Scotland. He is the author of the forthcoming book, International Law and Transboundary Aquifers, that's going to be published by Edward Elgar. The third presenter will be Gonzalo Hatch Curry. He's a professor researcher at the Department of Geography in the Philosophy and Liberal Arts faculty at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. He is the co-author of the book, Ley del Agua Subterránea, una propuesta, published by UNAM in 2017. And last but not least, we have Deborah Van Nijnatten, is a professor of political science and North American studies at Wilfrid Laurier University. She's a faculty member in the Balsillie School of International Affairs and research partner with the Great Lakes Policy Research Network. Her research is focused on transboundary water and climate governance in North America. Her current research focuses on the design and application of indicators for assessing and performance of transboundary institutions and networks aimed at managing water disputes. We are going to have 4 questions that we're going to be presenting to our panelists. Each panelist will have 3 minutes to respond. And here you have the first question. Transboundary groundwater resources are often complex formations that can better be described as transboundary aquifer systems. What should be the unit of management in a transboundary context? Should it be the individual formations, hydraulically related formations, the entire border, or some other unit, and why? And that's the question we're posing to our panelists. 3 minutes each. We're going to start with Alfonso.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Just to be precise, I'm still the chief hydrogeologist of the Geological
Alfonso,
Survey.
we can't hear you. Please make sure that you
I can hear him.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. No, I was just going to say, yes, I'm still the chief hydrogeologist of the GSC, but only for 3 weeks.
No. Alfonso,
yes.
Please make sure you select the English button.
Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, there you are. Great.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, I was just saying, sorry again, that I am still the chief hydrogeologist of the Geological Survey of Canada, but only for 3 weeks. Actually, I'm on holidays now, and my retirement is on the 11th of November. So anyways, Gabriel, I was very excited to receiving this first question. It is really a fundamental question for those working in this domain as I am for years. Now, I would like to start by saying that to avoid ambiguity, I would like to be very, very clear. This is not a competition between concepts and terms as they have existed for very long. I mean, an aquifer is an aquifer, whether it is located along the Mexico-USA border or along the border between Burkina Faso and Mali. An aquifer is an aquifer, we know that. However, now we have observed that there is a paradigm shift in the way aquifers are perceived now and studied. when dealing with multiple jurisdictions. We believe it or not, after 20 years, we're still unsure on how to define transboundary. There are many obsessions, many approaches. Is it a full aquifer or only the groundwater within the aquifer? Or in an aquifer system composed of multi-layers? Or is a groundwater flow system or groundwater stocks? I'm saying all this to keep that in mind because Gabriel's question is on the unit of management of transboundary context. All right, so this keep in mind while I develop my answer. So I thought that the best thing to do will be to use the lessons that we learned from ISARM, particularly ISARM Network of American Hemisphere. What we have learned there is that it is not always necessary and sometimes not even required to integrate the whole transboundary aquifer in a shared management decisions. Sometimes some people are considering groundwater flow systems instead of aquifer boundaries as a quantitative analysis to define the fluxes and the stocks along the borders or the border lines of transboundary aquifers, which is essential to managing transboundary groundwater. In other words, there are multiple stakes in the aquifer as well as there are multiple time and space scales. So at the end of the day, if I had to stop, I will say that makes transboundary aquifers issues a matter of scales. I would like to provide, if the next slide, please. Thank you. A very quick view of one aquifer that we studied and characterized along the border between Alberta in Canada and Montana in the USA. This is the Mill River Transboundary Aquifer. On the left-hand side, I show a map where we identify different scales of time. That's the resident time of groundwater as it's being recharged, and it moves on to the north and southeast. You can see at the more or less at the border, by coincidence, is where the recharge is being placed. And yes, this one. And as you move on, it can be as old as 1.5 million years or southeast into Montana. On the right-hand side, on the other hand, these multiple stakes, you see in the arrows indicated, I don't know if you can read it, but it's just different stakes, different interests. For example, here on this part of Montana, First Nations interests are environmental and social issues, whereas on this other corner of the aquifer, there's a Medicine Hat gas fields in contact with the aquifer, and the interest of industry there is gas field and wells. Of course, municipality interest and provincial interest and federal interest on both countries. Next slide, please. We have not completed the management part of the study, but I dare to suggest today in front of you that if we are consistent with the hydrogeological studies and hydrochemistry study, we will select something indicated in the vertical cross-section here and the red circle, approximately in between the recent water that is being recharged and the soft modern water. On the other side, right-hand side, you can see the same circle on two dimensions. First map here, you see flow, groundwater flow, and areas of subcrop and downcrop. So what we see at the bottom here are different colors is the identified areas of recharge, of discharge, of active flow, and low flow. So clearly the area on the red is the area where it's more adequate for groundwater management as a body for a shared management in the two countries. This is what I can say for now for this first question, Gabriel.
Okay, thank you very much, Alfonso. We'll move now to Francesco, please. And again, 3 minutes.
Hola, buenos días. ¿Se me oye?
Francesco, can you hear us? Oh, you're there.
¿Se me oye? Rosario,
okay.
¿me oyes?
Are you going to speak in Spanish or English?
Rosario, ¿me oyes?
You're going to do in Spanish?
Voy a hablar en español. He puesto Spanish y he puesto Unmute Original Audio. ¿Se me oye?
Sí, ya estás bien. Ya te van a escuchar ellos en inglés. Dale. Gracias.
Muy bien. Pues, en primer lugar, muchísimas gracias a los organizadores para invitarme a este evento tan importante sobre la gobernanza de aguas subterráneas, la gestión de aguas subterráneas y todo lo que tiene que ver con aguas subterráneas compartidas entre México y Estados Unidos. Entonces, en la primera pregunta, voy a dar una respuesta algo distinta de la que dio Alfonso, también por el perfil que tengo. Yo soy de Derecho Internacional Público. Y en la experiencia que he tenido, sobre todo en el cono sur de América Latina, lo que creo que interesa a los tomadores de decisiones cuando se trata de unidad de gestión es sobre todo ahí donde puede que haya problemas, donde puede que haya problemas de calidad o de cantidad de agua. Y esto es lo que en inglés a veces llamamos hotspots, y al hablar de acuífero transfronterizo, claramente estamos hablando de hotspots que ocurren al lado de la frontera, por un lado de la frontera y por otro. Ahora bien, esto científicamente no es correcto, es decir, como dijo Alfonso, estamos hablando de toda manera de un sistema que puede estar muy, muy lejano de la frontera, pero sobre todo en aquellos acuíferos donde el flujo de agua se mueve muy despacio, los impactos que necesitan una unidad de gestión concreta suelen ser en la frontera. Y para dar un ejemplo, os llevo, si me podéis poner la siguiente diapositiva, por favor, en el sistema acuífero guaraní, que es uno de los acuíferos donde he tenido la posibilidad de trabajar en los últimos 10 años. Y ahí ya en el proyecto, entre 2003-2009, el proyecto acuífero guaraní, se habían identificado 4 proyectos pilotos, 2 de los cuales eran justo en la frontera. Salto Concordia entre Uruguay y Argentina, y Santana do Livramento y Rivera entre Brasil y Uruguay. Y se habían identificado porque era ahí donde las presiones eran tales que necesitaban una unidad de gestión, que necesitaban un manejo particular, preciso e urgente. Así que, para concluir, en mi opinión, la unidad de gestión, cuando hablamos de manejo de acuífero transfronterizo, sobre todo si no se tiene mucho tiempo y no se tiene mucha plata, es en la frontera, en aquellas zonas que podemos determinar como hotspots. Muchas gracias, Gabriel.
All right. Thank you, Francesco. We'll now move on to Gonzalo. And again, 3 minutes.
Bueno, antes que nada, muchísimas gracias por invitarme a este importantísimo evento. Agradezco también a nombre de mi equipo de trabajo el documento que hemos preparado, la Ley de Agua Subterránea, no es de autoría solo mía, sino un equipo de trabajo de investigadores de la UNAM y también de la Universidad de Texas en Austin, el doctor Samuel Schmidt, que nos ha apoyado mucho también. Entonces, es un agradecimiento en general. Bueno, nosotros lo que hemos pensado, sobre todo en el tema de las aguas subterráneas transfronterizas, sobre todo pensando en lo que en México es, digamos, la falta de claridad conceptual. Ese es, digamos, uno de nuestros puntos más importantes en donde se ha enfocado nuestro trabajo. Aquí en esta línea lo que estamos viendo nosotros es que, bueno, en el ámbito internacional tenemos 3 distintas nociones de acuífero y de agua subterránea. Por una parte, la Convención UNESE de 1992 habla de agua subterránea, ¿no? Que tiene que ser verificada para que sea agua transfronteriza, mientras que la Convención Internacional de Cursos de Aguas Transfronterizas en Nueva York, bueno, habla de acuíferos transfronterizos solamente no confinados, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, ahí excluye también, por ejemplo, a los confinados. Más tarde, entonces, con la ley, el derecho a los acuíferos transfronterizos, se presenta otra conceptualización que tiene relación ahora, digamos, con el acuífero más el agua subterránea. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente lámina. Gracias. Entonces, justo este esquema lo que me permite señalar, como lo hizo también Alfonso Rivera en su intervención, pues es esta diferencia tan sencilla entre el acuífero, que sería esta referente geológico particular, pero también los sistemas de flujo de agua subterránea. Es decir, estamos frente a dos conceptos inicialmente que parecen distintos. Siguiente lámina, por favor. Entonces, si yo reviso rápidamente en la frontera México-Estados Unidos, considerando que en México solamente está la ley de aguas nacionales, que la subterránea es de la propiedad de la nación, es decir, del ámbito. Pero volteo a ver a los Estados Unidos diferentes conceptos. Por ejemplo, parece ser que hay más conceptos referentes. Perdón, me sacó el internet. Retomo entonces ya para concluir. Entonces hay diferentes conceptos de agua subterránea y acuífero en ambos países. Tomar nota de que en los Estados Unidos, pues cada uno de los estados fronterizos, California, Texas, este concepto de agua subterránea no existe. En Nuevo México tampoco. Esto, México. Hay que tomar en consideración que no hay de entrada una codificación jurídica homologada de estos conceptos. Por lo tanto, ese es un primer momento para poder hablar en un futuro de un acuerdo transfronterizo en la materia.
Okay, thank you very much, Gonzalo. And then now we're going to move on to Deborah. And again, please, 3 minutes.
Okay, well, thanks so much for inviting me to be on this panel and take part in the conference. I really learned a lot yesterday, and I'm going to try to bring some of that into my remarks today. So I want to start by noting that my answers to the questions are based on the findings of 2 studies that I've done in the Rio Grande Bravo region. One that was a small scale study conducted in 2019 where I asked water managers, policymakers, scientists, and academics to apply the OECD's water governance indicators to the region. And a medium-sized survey that I carried out this summer, which asked participants to reflect on the nature and degree of stakeholder engagement in water management in the RGB. Do you want to move ahead to the next slide, please? So as the question itself implies, transboundary water management is perhaps best viewed as taking place in a system, not at a particular scale or level or unit, but across them. And so for any groundwater system, management functions seem to me to be distributed around the system from the very specific regulatory infrastructure at the local, regional, state levels through legal mandates at the national level. And as Gonzalo just pointed out, there are principles and some conventions at the international level. And in addition to these formal aspects, there's a whole host of informal processes and networks that are in operation. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. The literature on water governance really indicates that polycentric governance, where you have multiple governing centers operating simultaneously, may be, a really useful way of responding to the complexities of managing natural resources like a groundwater system. And because of these complexities, we probably need polycentric governance. And Anita Milliman talked a little bit about that yesterday. But if we want to get polycentric governance right, I would suggest that we spend time focusing not only on specific management units, and Gabriel, I'm not sidestepping your question, but I really think that it would be interesting to focus on how the parts in the system interact and the degree to which they are connected and coordinated. And I think this requires asking 2 questions. One, where are the connecting mechanisms and where are they missing? So that's the gap closure comment that I think we had yesterday from one of the speakers. Second, to what degree do these connectors or linkages contribute to coordination within the system, or alternatively fragmentation? How do we make these connections within the system to make sure that all the centers are rowing in the same direction? David spoke yesterday about subsidiarity, and a number of other speakers talked about the importance of local innovation, local initiatives. Sharon gave us some really concrete examples of this operating in the system, but we can't get around the overarching legal mandates and requirements and some of the transboundary stuff, the international stuff, and the binational interactions. So how do we coordinate and link up these local initiatives in such a way that we get everybody rowing in the same direction? And I'll just end on the comment that if we as a group of people who spend a lot of time puzzling over how we govern transboundary water, if we collectively focused on what are the connectors or the linkages in the system, I wonder what we would come up with.
All right. Thank you very much for that response. We'll now move on to the second question, and that is, what institutional frameworks is or are, depending if it's framework or frameworks, plural, are critical to achieve a successful transboundary groundwater management regime? And also, at what level of governance should that framework operate? Is it to the specific aquifer, to local community, the state, the national, and so on, to be most successful, and also why? And again, I'm going to ask each speaker to speak for 3 minutes, and I'll try to be a little more restrictive this time. We need to keep it the 3-minute time limit. So let's start with Alfonso. And folks, if you have questions, please send them to Samuel or put them in the chat. Alfonso.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Gabriel. Again, I will use the lessons we learned from ISARM America's Network to frame the answer that I would like to give to this question. A very important one, by the way. Certainly, an institutional framework, according to what we learned, operates best at the specific aquifer and the local community scales for achieving a successful transboundary aquifer and groundwater management. Now, the framework should operate with a local level of governance. So that is the framework and the governance. To be successful, however, the framework should receive support from 2 or more states sharing the transboundary aquifer. And if I might have the second and last slide for this question, we came out at the regional strategy of transboundary aquifers that was published by UNESCO with this framework of governance and management. So this is an example of a common governance framework that was proposed for the Americas. Now, around the shared governance of the transboundary aquifer, we have various components of it. And one of the things that we realized in doing this exercise is that whether it is a legally binding agreement or a cooperation on science and data exchange, we still need some sort of arrangement. So it might come from science, which is the one that provides the knowledge. It might come from social participation, which is part of the governance of the local aquifer, at least at the local scale. Or eventually, as is the case in the Guarani, for instance, from legally binding agreement as it is for core countries. Those are policies. One of the things that came out of this, say, a common framework is that the transboundary aquifer management and governance focus on the resource management protection through these 4 things: characterizing and monitoring aquifer dynamics, that will be the science component; protecting against contamination, that will be the social component; and negotiating shared water allocations all together, with building legal institutional capacities at the area of where the governance is taking place. So I leave it at that, Gabriel.
All right. Thank you, Alfonso. We'll move on to Francesco. Francesco, you're muted.
Ok, perfecto. Entonces, A esa pregunta contesto, esa vez sí, de forma bastante parecida a lo que dijo Alfonso. Me dirijo enseguida a lo que podría ser, por ejemplo, una comisión, una autoridad conjunta, que sería, digamos, el marco institucional donde se llevaría a cabo la gestión. ¿Qué características debería tener? Pues en primer lugar, debería ser abierta, inclusiva. Eso lo que quiere decir es que todos los que tienen un interés en la gestión del acuífero deberían poder participar. Al mismo tiempo, tendría que ser transparente, tendría que haber acceso a la información relativa a la gestión del acuífero, cosa que no siempre es así. En cuanto a la escala, estoy de acuerdo con Alfonso, debería ser lo más local posible. Eso se refiere también a mi primera respuesta de los hotspots. Pero para que sea efectiva en función del aparato constitucional de determinados países que forman parte del acuífero, tiene que haber también la participación del gobierno central, sobre todo del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores. En cuanto a la competencia, ya hablaré en la siguiente pregunta. Vamos a ver, ayer, y si me ponen esa... Ayer estuve en un webinario de capacitación organizado por la UNESCO desde la oficina de Montevideo, y uno de los participantes me preguntó sobre el acuerdo de Escazú, sobre acceso a la información, participación pública y acceso a la justicia sobre el medio ambiente. Y si volvemos a la lámina precedente, muchas de esas características que he mencionado anteriormente se pueden ver fortalecidos gracias a este acuerdo de Escazú. Así que quería dejarlo ahí como punto de interés. Volvemos a la última lámina. Otro ejemplo, desde el marco latinoamericano, en Centroamérica, eso es muy reciente, el Ocotopeque Citalá, entre El Salvador y Honduras, tiene, por lo menos en papel, un aparato institucional que tiene algunas de las características que he mencionado. La tenéis ahí en inglés y os voy a poner en el chat un pequeño trabajo que hice sobre el Ocotopeque Citalá, donde podéis encontrar más información. Gracias, Gabriel.
All right, thank you, Francesco. We'll move on to Gonzalo. Gonzalo, you're muted.
Gracias, Gabriel. Voy a apagar mi video porque, sí, voy a apagar mi video porque tengo una mala conexión a internet. Una disculpa. Bueno, aquí lo importante es, en esta situación, es la unidad de gestión. Entonces, el concepto acuífero transfronterizo, del derecho a los acuíferos transfronterizos, ha tenido una influencia innegable en casi gran parte del planeta y sobre todo con los estados interesados para llevar a cabo acuerdos de evaluación inicial, evaluación científica del agua subterránea. Sin embargo, yo creo que es muy importante que recuperemos esta noción del agua subterránea. Lo que tenemos que, para poder definir cuál sería la unidad de gestión del agua subterránea transfronteriza, hay que gestionar el agua subterránea transfronteriza. Aquí hay un marco metodológico del cual nosotros partimos, que es el sistema los sistemas de flujo de agua subterránea. Entonces, estos sistemas de flujo de agua subterránea lo que indican sería cómo poder evaluar el agua, identificar las zonas de recarga, de descarga, tal y como lo estaba enseñando en su experiencia Alfonso Rivera, tan valiosa, ¿no? Entonces, indicar cómo se mueve el agua, cuál es la edad del agua, cuál es el tiempo de residencia, porque al final de cuentas el concepto que importa, y bueno, digamos, hoy en la conferencia magistral de inicio se mencionó claramente, es el agua. El concepto que se utiliza es el agua, no el acuífero. Entonces, debemos ahora de enfocarnos hacia el agua subterránea, cómo funciona, de dónde a dónde se mueve. Siguiente, por favor, ¿no? Y esto pues implica, siguiente lámina, por favor. ¿Esto qué implica? Pues ir contestando estas preguntas que ya hemos venido viendo a lo largo de estos 2 días, ¿no? ¿quién va a gestionar la evaluación del agua subterránea transfronteriza en México y en los Estados Unidos? Las universidades, las agencias federales, el sector privado, va a haber una alianza entre todos para producir, pero lo más importante que yo me quedo pensando es, ¿quién va a reconocer oficialmente los resultados de esta evaluación? ¿Servirá para fortalecer las instituciones actuales, como por ejemplo la SILA, y aprovechar las oportunidades de lo mencionado en el Acta 242? Yo creo que lo más importante aquí también es pensar en que ambos países tienen que pensar a corto plazo en cómo construir un canal de comunicación para tener una evaluación científica homologada y tener conceptos legales homologados sobre el agua subterránea. Sin eso no es posible. ¿Dónde podemos hacerlo? Por lo mientras, pues bueno, está el Acuerdo de la Paz de 1983, donde ya se define un espacio geográfico fronterizo donde se puede llevar a cabo esta evaluación del agua subterránea. Insisto con eso. Siguiente, por favor. Nosotros, aquí ya casi termino esta pregunta. Siguiente lámina, por favor. Nosotros hemos presentado una propuesta de definiciones de conceptos en este documento que ya en el 2021 se va a presentar una revisión. Incluso el 1 de octubre pasado, ya en la Cámara de Diputados, se presentó en la Gaceta Parlamentaria este documento para discusión y ya contiene estas definiciones y hay un capítulo de acuíferos transfronterizos este documento. Gracias.
Okay, thank you very much, Gonzalo. And we'll move now to Deborah, please. 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to pick up where I left off in my previous answer by providing some indication of the connective tissue that I think is needed in the system. And this might point the way to sussing out the kinds of institutional frameworks that Gabriel's getting at in his question. Let me note, though, I don't see much prospect of new institutions in the near or even the medium term just because of the political situation. And so I guess I would echo the comments of folks yesterday who were indicating that we probably need to work with what we have and that innovation is possible given the existing framework. Just for reasons of time, I think I'll just flip to the next slide there. I asked the question of David Milley yesterday about what channels were open to him to push his what I thought were very important scientific review conclusions out to water users, water managers, and other actors very consciously, because I really believe that transboundary groundwater knowledge gathering and dissemination is one really important place to start in terms of connective tissue. The thought processes involved in questions like how can we get together truly binational data sources and who needs to participate in that? Who needs to know about these findings? How can we ensure that everybody knows what a dire situation we're in? Those kinds of questions can help us think about the institutional infrastructure we need to have in place. I would add here that respondents in both of our studies expressed considerable concern that truly binational data does not exist, and that knowledge, not only in the form of water data, monitoring and assessment stuff, but also about initiatives taking place in different parts of the basin is not being circulated around the system. So respondents really told us that the lessons learned in one place through a particular initiative are not generating learning elsewhere in the system, and that we have to think about how we set up infrastructure to do that. Somebody asked the question yesterday in the chat, do we know of any efforts for the expansion of data sharing, standardization, and repositories? That's a really important question, because it seems that the sources of the data and the lessons learned are fragmented across agencies and institutions. And the answer that I got to my question yesterday was really revealing, right? How do you, I asked, how do you push those findings out? And David said, well, I'm not sure, whoever will listen. Okay, well, we needed infrastructure to push that information through the system, whether it originates, at a local level, as Alfonso was talking about, and Francesco as well, or, you know, whatever it is, it needs to go out through the system. Relatedly, networks of people that are engaged in water management at different levels are absolutely critical in terms of bridging gaps across user groups, government agencies, local communities, and across scales. Everybody talked about this yesterday. Francesco just highlighted this in his answer. If you want to change the system, you have to invite more people in and have meaningful participation. And just a quick shout out here to an article that's just come out recently, Bill Hargrove and Joe Heyman, who they have actually laid out a methodology for how you identify, classify, and then engage all manner of stakeholders in water in the Rio Grande Bravo area. And it's a really great analysis of this and provides a route forward. And a really important finding that wends its way across both of our studies too was that respondents didn't think it was just government's job to do this, to set up this architecture, and that in fact, participatory opportunities engagement should be set up through partnerships with groups that are outside of government, and that those were the most helpful in terms of putting in place long-lasting architecture. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Deborah. We'll move on to our next question number 3 for the panel. What regulatory mechanism should be incorporated into a management framework for transboundary groundwater resources, and how should they be implemented and enforced in the transboundary context? And we'll start again with Alfonso. 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Gabriel. I only have one slide on this very complex question. First, because it's not my domain, regulatory, but also because I think it is still on very, very early stages. I mean, we are trying to define the science, we're trying to define the scales, the stakes, cooperation, collaboration. So regulatory.
Alfonso, are you in English?
Mean, again, I'm sorry, I'm not used to it. I said I only have one slide, so it'll be quick. The thing is, we are only still in the very early stages of getting into regulatory mechanisms for transboundary aquifers. You know, we still got a lot to do in terms of cooperation and science and defining terms and whatnot. So I only put one slide, and clearly, again, based on what we learned from my SARM, I think any regulatory mechanism should be incorporated into a management framework similar to the common one that we proposed to the Americas in my previous slide in the second question. Regulatory mechanisms for transboundary aquifers should be designed to protect water, first and uppermost, and also to identify and support opportunities for societal and economical benefits in balancing multi-jurisdictional and international interests. The sentence seems complicated, and it is. And to display that, I wanted to present a graph that we designed during the ISARM Americas group, but it was so complex, and given that we only have 2-3 minutes, I opted for not showing it, but I can send you a paper where we did. Now, the main challenge in the design and implementation of an ad hoc regulatory mechanism is how to combine it with existing legal and institutional instruments of each jurisdiction. Of course, along the border between the USA and Mexico, we still have more than just 2, because also we all know that the states in the US also have their own way of managing, so that complicates life. However, at present, there are not many examples that I can show you to illustrate what I'm saying on this type of regulatory mechanism. Perhaps the Guarani in South America, and I leave it at that because I know Francesco is coming up soon, so maybe he'll say something about it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Alfonso. We'll move to Francesco.
¿Se me oye en español bien? Vale. No voy a hablar, yo he interpretado esta pregunta no como la presencia o menos de acuerdos específicos sobre acuíferos, como podría ser el acuerdo guaraní, pero sobre opinar sobre algo regulatorio específico, digamos, que puede ser útil para la gestión de un acuífero transfronterizo. Y quiero comentar en un par de minutos la evaluación de impacto transfronterizo. Dice, la evaluación de impacto ambiental, sobre todo, es algo que está presente en el proyecto de artículos de la Comisión de Derecho Internacional, pero, y esto es una crítica que tenemos muchos, en mi opinión, debería ser una evaluación que deberían poder impulsar ambos estados a los dos lados de la frontera para que sea más eficaz. Si solo dejamos que el estado que esté planificando una actividad y considere que igual eso va a causar daño al otro estado, pues nos quedamos a medias. Sería mejor que ambos estados podrían impulsar esta decisión de llevar a cabo una evaluación de impacto ambiental. En un mundo ideal, la comisión que he mencionado antes, la autoridad conjunta, debería poder tener el poder también de impulsarla como un árbitro, digamos. Y eso lo veremos con el acuerdo guaraní. Esto está todo bien, pero si la autoridad conjunta no tiene dinero y no tiene capacidad y no tiene personal, esto se queda en nada. Siguiente lámina, por favor. Siguiente lámina, por favor. Perfecto. Ahora bien, la evaluación de impacto ambiental no es la única regulación, elemento regulatorio que nos podría interesar. El derecho internacional, tanto a nivel de proyectos de artículos, pero también a nivel más general, nos habla de la notificación previa cuando se quiere llevar a cabo una actividad que podría causar daño a su vecino. El intercambio de información también. Pero lo que nos interesa también es, ¿y si todo eso va mal, qué pasa? Si yo no estoy de acuerdo con el resultado de la evaluación de impacto ambiental, ¿cómo voy a hacer? ¿Cómo voy a encontrar una solución justa? Pues podría ser que el acuerdo en particular tenga una disposición sobre sistema de solución de controversias que dirime un problema de este tipo, o si no la tiene, podría abrirse al derecho internacional general. No estamos hablando de acuíferos, estamos hablando de ríos transfronterizos. Esto es lo que ha pasado con las papeleras entre Argentina y Uruguay. Lo dejo ahí y muchas gracias, Kevin.
Very good. Thank you, Francesco. Let's move on to Gonzalo, please.
Coincido perfectamente con Francesco con lo que ha comentado. Yo creo que es muy importante trabajar de nuevo con los principios de la gestión de las aguas transfronterizas y plantear ahora sí, de alguna manera creo que entre México y Estados Unidos ya hay instituciones que se crearon al amparo del Tratado de Aguas del 44 que podrían fortalecerse. A lo mejor no hay necesidad de crear más instituciones, sino fortalecerlas y fortalecerlas en el sentido de darle, por ejemplo, desde México, darle más facultades a la Comisión Internacional de Límites y Aguas para tratar este tema. Yo creo que estos son los puntos que se tendrían que trabajar básicamente, ¿no? Que es ejecutar programas y planes para, digamos, impulsar una gestión transfronteriza del agua subterránea. Ya está en los Estados Unidos y en México el antecedente del TAP. Es muy importante identificar los recursos, de dónde van a venir los recursos financieros para ejecutar ese programa de evaluación científica del agua subterránea. Y luego organizar y coordinar los mecanismos de homologación, comparación, validación e intercambio de la información. Es muy importante homologar la información, insisto, porque si no, digamos, no podemos evaluar de un lugar algo y en otro país otra situación. Y por supuesto, abrir esto a la participación ciudadana, desde luego con un ámbito bastante local, ¿no? En México se enfrenta fuerte centrismo que hay en la gestión del agua subterránea. La Ciudad de México está bastante lejos de la frontera norte, también de la frontera sur con Guatemala y Belice, pero hay que establecer mecanismos a partir de lo que tenemos jurídico para fortalecer las instituciones. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente lámina. Ahora, en lo técnico, digamos, yo lo veo en jurídico y ahora en lo técnico. En lo técnico, yo creo que ya se está llevando a cabo este trabajo. Gabriel Eckstein y Rosario acaban de publicar un trabajo maravilloso de los pozos que hay en Texas, ¿no? Excelente, pero digamos, si consideramos ese trabajo, deberíamos de seguir esa ruta, ¿no? Ambos gobiernos deben de tener un censo de pozos, el tipo de construcción, los niveles, el uso, la cantidad. Digo, y esto ya lo dijo, por ejemplo, Sharon Megdal, que nos enfrentamos a grandes vacíos de información. ¿Cuál es la cantidad de agua que se extrae en tiempo récord, ¿no? Entonces, tampoco hemos hablado mucho de cómo las diferentes actividades económicas y los diferentes usuarios del agua pueden estar contaminando el agua y qué estamos haciendo para evitar eso. Y sobre todo, cómo vamos a hacer con este tema para evitar o mitigar los efectos del cambio climático. Todo esto requiere entonces la aplicación, nosotros lo vemos así, del principio precautorio. Y para eso hay que establecer un programa, al menos en México, y después vemos en Estados Unidos es factible con toda esa diversidad jurídica que tenemos, pero tendríamos que ir en esas dos, en lo técnico y en lo jurídico. Yo creo que aquí el principio fundamental es, ya para terminar, la conservación y el uso sustentable del agua subterránea entre ambos países, aplicándolo como un principio que deben tener todos los usuarios del agua. Lo ambiental creo que es el gran momento que nos puede ayudar a construir un arreglo binacional. Gracias.
All right, thank you, Gonzalo, and we move on to Deborah, please.
You know what, Gabriel, I'm going to hold my fire for the next one. So I'll skip to the fourth because the original question, the regulatory term I interpreted more narrowly, and I think there are lots of other people at the conference that know more about that than I. So I'll wait for the next one.
Okay, then we'll move on to question number 4. For the panel, consider a specific case example of transboundary aquifers anywhere in the world and identify the greatest challenge and opportunity to achieving binational or multinational, if that's the case, cooperation among the aquifer riparians of that cross-border scenario. And we'll start with Alfonso.
Okay, I hope I'm in English this time. Yes. Interesting question. A case example you asked. I chose to talk a little bit of a lower Colorado River Basin transboundary aquifer. This is, in terms of size, is very similar to the size of the Mill River transboundary aquifer that I presented in my first question, my first answer rather. This is composed of surface water and groundwater shared by 6 jurisdictions, not 2. That is 4 states and 2 countries. So Arizona and California in the US, and Sonora and Baja California in Mexico, plus the federal. I throw my, if you put the next slide, please. Yeah, I have a list of 6 or 7 challenges and opportunities, as you requested, Gabriel, in order to achieve binational or perhaps even multi-jurisdictional cooperation, because that's what it is. It's not just binational. Clearly, the main thing is that many jurisdictions are involved with different heights, with different regulations, with different practices, with different management. So this is a big challenge for sure. Now, interstate management practices already exist, but separately, US and Mexico. But there is no binational management for this aquifer. Surface water, in this case, the Colorado River, of course, is clearly and unambiguously interconnected with groundwater. Now, the transboundary management is embedded within the river basin organizations, representing a big challenge for collaboration because, of course, it has been repeated again and again. Surface water is easier to measure, it's easier to observe, etc. So that's a challenge to me. Now, cooperation and collaboration between science, policy, and management exists already through the International Boundary Water Commission Treaty from 1944, as well as in minutes 318 and 319. However, these are mostly on surface water. So that is, again, a challenge. And I'd like to close the list with a positive note, an opportunity, which I believe is worked. Current efforts include a conceptual model integrating surface water, groundwater, and transboundary effects as a first step in a joint scientific assessment, which represents the basis, I believe, for future shared binational cooperation. That is what I had to say in the case example, Gabriel. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alfonso. Move on to Francesco, please. You're muted, Francesco.
¿Ahora me oyen? Vale. Perfecto. Así que aquí sí que voy a hablar del acuerdo guaraní. Voy a referirme en parte a lo que encontráis en las láminas, pero también algo que escuché ayer en el webinario organizado por la UNESCO en Montevideo. El acuerdo guaraní es una historia de montañas rusas, de altos y bajos. Se negoció entre el 2004 y el 2010, se firmó en 2010 y todavía no ha entrado en vigor. Entonces, altos, ¿por qué? Porque muchos lo hemos utilizado como modelo. Los que estaban en París en la conferencia ISAR de 2010 se recordarán, unos meses después de la firma del acuerdo guaraní, se utilizaba como ejemplo de cooperación transfronteriza en materia de acuíferos. Modelo y positivo porque juntaba la ciencia, levantamiento de datos, voluntad política por parte de los 4 estados. No había presión sobre el agua y sin embargo los 4 estados han encontrado un acuerdo. Pero luego empezaron los bajos. La montaña rusa empezó a bajar. Los 2 países, Argentina y Uruguay, lo ratificaron muy pronto. Brasil lo hizo en 2017 y Paraguay lo hizo en 2018. Al que yo mismo pensaba, pues ya está hecho. Los 4 países lo han ratificado, de aquí a unos meses va a entrar en vigor. Y no. Paraguay sí ha promulgado una ley nacional diciendo, ok, el acuerdo guaraní me gusta, pero no ha depositado el instrumento de ratificación, no ha enviado una carta, es literalmente así de sencillo, no ha enviado una carta al Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores brasileño y solo cuando Itamaraty, en Brasilia, recibirá ese instrumento de ratificación, el acuerdo guaraní entra en vigor. ¿Eso por qué es importante? Porque hasta que no entre en vigor, siguiente diapositiva, siguiente lámina, la comisión, la autoridad conjunta entre los 4 países que se creará a raíz del artículo 15 del acuerdo guaraní, no existe. Y entonces todo lo que estamos diciendo, evaluación de impacto ambiental, la zona hotspots, la participación pública, está todo escrito de alguna forma en ese tratado internacional. Parece todo muy bonito, pero hasta que no entre en vigor y hasta que esta comisión no se forme, es papel mojado. Muchas gracias, Pierre.
All right. Thank you very much, Francesco. Move on to Gonzalo.
Bueno, nosotros en la Ciudad de México no hemos evaluado acuíferos transfronterizos. Como tal, no, quiero decirles que no es una línea de investigación prioritaria para la universidad. Hablar de agua subterránea en México es un tema bastante todavía complicado. Pero bueno, nosotros lo que hicimos hace poco fue publicar, el doctor Carrillo Rivera, que está aquí con nosotros, el doctor Huizar y yo hicimos este trabajo, hicimos una lectura del último que salió del acuífero Río San Pedro, y bueno, nosotros aplaudimos ese trabajo, creemos que es bastante importante, pero también vemos que a partir de eso es necesario para los siguientes trabajos de evaluación de agua subterránea en México, subterránea transfronteriza, es necesario fortalecer el enfoque del sistema en la conceptualización del agua subterránea. En México, no sé en Estados Unidos, pero al menos en México se debe de fortalecer la creación de licenciaturas, de posgrados en evaluación de agua subterránea desde una perspectiva sistémica. Y luego, para así tener, digamos, los recursos humanos, tener también los arreglos institucionales necesarios para poder fortalecer la infraestructura, el monitoreo y las bases de datos necesarias para poder, en el momento llegado con Estados Unidos, de tener una discusión sobre este tema, tener en México la información suficiente, ¿no? Entonces, es muy importante en este sentido, y vuelvo a enfatizarlo, homologar conceptos legales, homologar conceptos científicos, primero dentro de México y luego con los Estados Unidos, para tener, en la medida de lo mejor posible, un acuerdo exitoso. Cuando llegue el momento de que el tema ocupe, digamos, una posición relevante.
All right, thank you very much, Gonzalo and Deborah.
Okay, so I would say the political will to initiate change in behavior across a wide swath of users who have oftentimes little or no incentive to change is clearly the biggest challenge. And that message, and that message certainly came through loud and clear in both of the studies that we did in the region. But I do think that to some extent, and we can talk about how much, people in the system will find it harder to operate as they always have and ignore sustainability objectives within the broader system if they are more firmly connected into that system, if they have to face other actors who have different perspectives in terms of managing the water resource, and if there are indeed some broader objectives guiding the system. Very quickly, two cases. One, Gabriel, a little bit of a cheat here. This is not a groundwater case, but it is a surface water case. Great Lakes. And there, what has happened is that folks have relatively recently put the final touches on what's called a nearshore framework to manage particularly polluted areas along the shores of the lakes. So in an updated version of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, a set of objectives were inserted into an annex to the agreement, which is not unlike the minute process. Okay, there's some similarities there, which charged the parties to formulate a nearshore framework for each of the lakes that would identify the areas that were particularly stressed, figure out why they were stressed, and then engage a whole group of actors in whatever it took to restore that area. So there are some broad objectives guiding the system. And please note, these are not regulatory objectives, which there's no border in North America where you're going to get transboundary regulatory objectives. They were broader objectives to engage in action, bring everybody together, and then implement an action plan and report back. Okay, so those three attributes were in this system. Next slide, please. The second is groundwater management on the Danube. And I know less about this, but am increasingly fascinated. And I think in this case actually are some answers to the questions that have been posed in the chat. I think if we look at it more, the Danube River Basin, I think, offers some interesting institutional innovations. Certainly the EU Water Framework Directive provides a firmer top-down set of regulatory objectives, again, that we would not see in North America. But there is a groundwater guidance document that's been put together under the International Committee for the Protection of the Danube River. And it really reads as a how-to guide in terms of setting up transboundary infrastructure to manage shared groundwaters. The first thing, for example, that was done was to set up a groundwater task group under the ICBDR, whose job was actually to define harmonized criteria for determining groundwater bodies of basin-wide significance, pulling together all the available information on chemical and groundwater monitoring networks. So not only do we need to know which basins we want to cooperate on, which underground bodies, but also what is the state of those bodies. And, you know, after that, there was a strategy group for thinking very concretely about what projects do we want to undertake along the border. And the groundwater document there, the guidance document, has a whole set of examples in terms of how to set up the infrastructure for harmonizing data, for monitoring, how to exchange information, and then how to guide implementation projects. So again, there are broader goals for the management systems, processes that involve different parties in regular exchanges, and a connective tissue that kind of brings water users and other actors into a system that has, you know, a raison d'etre, a set of goals focused on sustainability.
All right, thank you very much. And that concludes the specific questions to our panelists. We now have a bit of time for questions from the audience. Sam, do you want me to read these, or do you want to pick which ones? We have quite a few.
Gabriel, if you look at your document, we selected some, this panel had like 2,000 questions. So,
sorry,
we
have.
I mean, it's up to you.
Okay, yeah, no, I can see those. So, okay, let's start. Let's see. So, and because we've covered such a large swath of different topics and ideas here, so we may be going, some of these questions relate to the first set of questions. Let's see, Eliana Rodriguez was asking, should we treat the hydrological system separately, administratively, at the federal level as binational? That is, groundwater and surface water as two independent systems. If so, has this worked? And should we continue to manage independently the quantity or quality in availability studies? I don't know if anybody wants to take that on. Any of our panelists want to try to take that question on?
Gabriel, can you say it again?
Sure. Let me. Should I put this in the chat also, Samuel? Okay. So let me.
It is in the chat, isn't it? It is already.
It is in Spanish. No, it's not.
It is in Spanish. Yeah.
Let me put this in the chat now.
I didn't see it. I didn't see it.
Okay. So should we treat the hydrological system separately, administratively, at the federal level as binational?
That is, groundwater and surface water as two independent systems. If so, has this worked? And continue to manage independently the quantity.
I think it's quality.
In availability studies. So she's mentioning, should we still work separate and by separate nations and separate sources, or should we go one together?
So, I would say, if I can jump in here, I would say that in an ideal world, no, we should not manage these separately. But the reality is that there are different regulatory systems on either side of the border. So then the question becomes, how do we work together, recognizing that we are not going to change the other's regulatory system? But I think that the IBWC is already working in that way, and CILA, right? They're already working to to try to overcome regulatory differences. And the Lower Rio Grande Water Quality Initiative was another example where there was a real concerted effort over many years to bring everybody together and to really understand better each other's regulatory systems and agree on data and on monitoring networks and assessment and come up with an agreement on sort of what some of the water quality issues were at different parts in the region.
So you mentioned the IBWC and how it functions, and some of the comments that some of you made in terms of whether we need a new system or new regime or existing, or your I think it was one of you was talking about just use the existing regimes and just give them authority to deal with groundwater. But David Gronfeld is asking, are there any good examples of local transboundary institutions that already manage transboundary aquifers? Do we have any good examples that we can look at? Because, yeah, Alfonso.
Well, actually, this is the second question. I was going to say something about the first question.
Okay.
The link, so I can add them up.
Yeah.
I don't think. I mean, hydrological system. It depends how you define this. Hydrological system meaning, in this case, I believe groundwater and surface water. Now, in the case of surface water between Mexico and the U.S., I believe my understanding is that surface water already has. I mean, surface water in general has already some sort of administratively regulatory minutes or agreements between the two countries. However, groundwater is not included there. So separately, if they are already separate, they are not separate, they're binational, Colorado River and the Rio Grande. But the problem with groundwater is that sometimes it's not necessarily is covered in the whole basin. There are places, there are different scales and whatnot. So I believe in terms of cooperation, not in the management, but in the cooperation on identifying, I would stick to what I said in my first question, identify the areas that are more adequate for shared management. And the second question is a good one too, because we saw that with the Mill River in between Canada and USA. Now the Mill River happens to be a river as well, Milk River. And the aquifer is called the same, Mill River Aquifer. Now the Mill River already has an agreement between the two countries and is being shared. You leave me water, we dam here and whatnot. And it works. It's been working now for many decades or decades. Now the thing, when we discover the groundwater of the aquifer is much bigger than the river itself, then all of a sudden there was a conundrum on discussion because it goes beyond the river basin. And therefore the cooperation is only done at present on the scientific understanding, not administratively. So that's the way I see it. I don't think in the case of Mexico and the USA, I mean, they should be separated, but they should be localized in the terms of the most important groundwater dynamics along the border.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in on this? If not, there's a question here. Yeah, Francesco.
Si puedo, por favor.
Yeah. Francesco.
Entonces, si la pregunta es si existen ejemplos de comisiones o de ejemplos de gestión conjunta de acuíferos transfronterizos que funcionan, los dos que puedo apuntar, uno que no es un tratado internacional y el otro que sí lo es. El primero es un acuerdo entre dos municipalidades, Salto en Uruguay y Concordia en Argentina. Ahí el problema es la explotación de pozos por aguas termales. Sin embargo, la autoridad conjunta que existe entre las dos municipalidades ha hecho que haya más datos, más ciencia, y en función de tener más ciencia, se hace una cooperación conjunta de estas aguas termales que vienen del acuífero guaraní, muy profundo. Ahí. El otro ejemplo es en Europa, se habla mucho del acuífero de Ginebra, entre Francia y Suiza. Y aquí lo que tenemos es un problema, más que un problema, es una característica de recarga artificial. ¿De acuerdo? Esto sí que es un tratado internacional, es de lo más antiguos que hay en materia de acuíferos transfronterizos. Ha sido renovado en el 2008 y funciona porque hay dos cosas. Uno, un aparato constitucional jurídico que permite a las dos zonas limítrofas de Suiza y Francia de hablar entre ellos de una forma efectiva. Y dos, porque ambos países, ambas zonas, digamos, de Francia y Suiza, han identificado que era beneficioso para ellos llegar a un acuerdo que les permitiese utilizar el agua y la recarga artificial de la mejor forma y de la mejor forma. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Francesco.
Sure.
So I'd like to move to this next question here from Cuauhtemoc Osorno, which, let me put this in the chat, which I think is a really interesting question for all of our panelists. And it's basically asking, should we start thinking about local participation at the transboundary level? So whether we can have transboundary basin councils to be involved in these kinds of governance and management issues. So if any of the panelists want to jump in, I see some heads nodding. I don't know who wants to take this on.
Gonzalo, I think this was a question
for Gonzalo. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gracias, Gabriel. Sí, gracias. Bueno, hasta donde yo recuerdo, antes del el nuevo nombramiento del comisionado mexicano de la Comisión Internacional de Límites y Aguas, funcionaba en la SILA, había creado una especie de consejos consultivos del agua. Precisamente el doctor Samuel Schmidt, que está aquí, fue presidente de un consejo consultivo de la SILA en Ciudad Juárez en algún momento. Entonces, la SILA había creado estos consejos consultivos. No era, digamos, no estaba en la ley, sino creo que había sido algo que se había creado en proceso para poder tratar los temas transfronterizos. Pero, bueno, si se...
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're not hearing Gonzalo.
Gonzalo, no te escuchamos.
The connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his connection is dropping.
Okay. Well, maybe if Francesco or Deborah or Alfonso
muy
response.
I can jump in. It's, I attended a the Basin Council meeting for the Rio Grande last August.
Hold on. I think we have two people speaking right now.
Oh, sorry.
No es un acuerdo, es una carta de intención.
Hold on.
Muy precisamente.
I don't think the translator is hearing what you're saying. So can we start again? Let's start with Francesco and then Deborah.
Okay.
Francesco, make sure you have selected the language you're talking about.
Okay. Iba diciendo que el acuífero Ocotepeque-Citalá, entre El Salvador y Honduras, tiene una carta de intención, y ahí sí que se dice claramente que las poblaciones locales, y se mencionan los pueblos indígenas.
I don't think we are hearing
no translation.
Francesco. We're not hearing James. Is Francesco
Spanish,
talking?
Mute original audio. Can you hear
Francesco,
me now?
have you said? Okay.
¿Se me oye ahora?
Sí, se te escucha.
Yes.
Sí, yo te escucho en español.
Okay.
Bien.
¿Los traductores también?
Sí, ellos te van a escuchar también, los traductores.
Voy a ser muy breve. El acuífero de que hablé en Centroamérica, El Salvador y Honduras. Hay una carta de intención firmada también por los Ministerios de Asuntos Exteriores y más agentes. Ahí se mencionan las poblaciones locales, también pueblos indígenas, género y todo. Sin embargo, el punto que quiero decir es que otra vez, eso está todo bien tenerlo en un papel, pero si luego no se hace efectivo, en mi opinión, sirve para muy poco. Yo he tenido experiencia de participar en consultaciones con comunidades locales, aquí en Escocia, sobre el tema no de acuíferos, y eso solo sirve si después lo que sale del input de las comunidades locales de verdad hace huella, de verdad hace hincapié en lo que es la gestión de día a día. Si no, se convierte en un ejercicio casi académico que sirve solo hasta un cierto punto. Gracias, Jerry.
Okay, let's quickly go back to Gonzalo. I think he's back with us.
Yes, he wants to say something.
And then we'll go to Deborah and finish this up.
Gracias.
So,
Una disculpa porque tengo una conexión mala. Bueno, lo que estaba tratando de decir entonces es que sí sería necesario entonces recuperar, por ejemplo, las figuras que ya tenía la SILA de consejos consultivos, pero pasarlas, digamos, a la ley, que no funcionaban, digamos, dentro de lo que establecía la ley, y ver de qué manera se puede medir, evaluar el éxito o el fracaso de esos consejos consultivos de carácter transfronterizo, bueno, para tratar aguas fronterizas, que no eran transfronterizos como tal. Lo que sí sería deseable, entonces, es que dentro de los consejos de cuenca actuales, sí se crearan al menos comisiones especiales de usuarios del agua que traten asuntos de agua subterránea transfronteriza. El problema es que también tenemos consejos de cuenca bastante que geográficamente no coinciden, digamos, o no está definido con cómo funciona el agua subterránea. El Consejo de Cuenca del Río Bravo es un buen ejemplo. Es un consejo de cuenca enorme, opera, digamos, en Monterrey, pero incluye desde Chihuahua hasta Tamaulipas. Entonces, estamos hablando de una cuenca muy grande, pero es una cuenca base de las aguas superficiales. Creo que esto tendría que cambiar la organización geográfica de los usuarios del agua cuando comience a hablarse de aguas subterráneas transfronterizas, aprovechando, digamos, la arquitectura institucional y jurídica que tenemos el día de hoy en México. Gracias.
Gabriel, may I say something?
Very quickly, we're running out of time. So
okay,
I know Deborah wanted to say something. Please.
Just very, very quickly, I attended last year the Rio Bravo Basin Council meeting with a whole bunch of people who are with us today. And I thought it was very interesting. They had a very wide range of water users, officials, stakeholders, and a wide range of topics on which people could work through. And there was presentations, but also work tables. And, you know, it really got into some of the nitty gritty of managing water, but it was not cross-border per se. So I want to echo what Gonzalo said about having sort of committees of those basin councils that actually extend across the border in that way. And one little plug for, you know, under the Border Environmental Plan, there are the regional work groups. And I'm wondering if those regional work groups in some form might provide a little bit of an example for how to organize through the basin different, you know, basin level groups or local regional level groups.
I was going to say the same and very quickly. It would be worth to look at some other places, such as the committees between British Columbia, the province of British Columbia, and the state of Washington in the Lower Fraser Transboundary Aquifer. It's very small, but they have a very operating.
Gabriel, you're on.
It is nothing to do. Oh, not again. It is not British Columbia and Washington State is worth looking at it because it works very well. It is nothing to do with federal governments, neither Canada's government or the USA government. It's really local, and they look at 4 things: local cooperation, exchange of data, joint monitoring even.
Yeah.
And when one of the 2 sides intends to pump additional water, groundwater, they inform the other side. These are committees. They manage themselves, they're financing themselves, and they are not legally binding.
All right, thank you. And thank you all the panelists. We're behind time, so let me just quickly wrap up. First of all, to say thank you to all the panelists for your participation. We received a lot of questions that I think we're going to put on the website afterwards, and maybe we can continue the discussion. Just for a quick wrap up for this, if I've learned anything from your comments and your ideas and your presentations, is that it seems to me that every aquifer is going to be different. It seems to me that every local condition is going to be different. And by that I mean in terms of the hydrogeology, the climate, the water needs, the water uses, who the stakeholders are. And so, we should be looking at that local regional perspective of these aquifers in terms of how we think about governance and management. But of course, we need maybe the states and the federal government's also involved, but it's really the local. But we don't know even how to define local because we don't know what the condition, the aquifer sumas is going to be different than the Bolson, which is going to be different from Guarani. And so each aquifer is going to have to come up with its own institutional system that's appropriate, unit of management, and maybe even regulations, although there seems to be some consensus on regulations in terms of data exchange, prior notification, cooperation, some basic level of legal regime. So that seems to be what I take my real 2-second takeaway from all that you have presented here. Thank you very much for your participation. This has been exciting and very interesting. And like Rosario said at the beginning, this is my topic. I love this topic, and so I thank you very much for this. This is fantastic. And I'm going to turn it back to Rosario and Sam.
Yes, yes, Gabriel. Thank you. Thank you to the speakers. Really, really, really. I love this topic. I mean, this is awesome. So thank you. I mean, I wish you all can be here and we can, share a glass of, what is the one that you owe me, Alfonso? Prosciutto? Prosecco. Yeah, that's the one. And we can keep talking about that because I know Francesca will like that and I know that Deborah will like that too. So, but it will happen. It will happen. Keep the faith. And this will also pass. So anyway, thank you again. Thank you, Gabriel, as always. And let's move on. Discussion panel number 4. We're going to keep talking about transboundary groundwater management, but now from the point of numerical models now. So I'm going to introduce again, now as a moderator, Alfonso Rivera. And I'm going to read again your bio. You're the chief hydrogeologist of the Geological Survey of Canada and the chairman of the International Association of Hydrogeologists, Transboundary Aquifers Commission. Alfonso is the author and editor of the book, Canada's Groundwater Resources, published in 2014, and it's always a pleasure to have you around. So go ahead and take over the panel, the last panel of the day.
Thank you so much, Rosario. And clearly, this is a great opportunity for me too. And both panel 3 and panel 4 are linked. And this is also passionate areas of for myself. This is transboundary groundwater in the sense of numerical models. We discussed in the previous panel the models that are conceptual in nature and how to deal with groundwater, transboundary groundwater, or transboundary aquifers in terms of management. What are the models? And we discussed that. So now we're going to shift into the numerical models that must be seen as tools in support of management. And for that, I have 3 very distinguished speakers here with me today, all very experts in modeling. Alice Mayer from UTEP, James Caligari from the U.S. Geological Survey, and Randy Hansel, who used to be USGS as well, and now is OneWater Hydrologic. Now, I will introduce each one of them, and given that we have only 3 instead of 4, you will have the luxury of having 4 minutes per question, or if it is shorter, the better. I will begin with Alex Mayer. Dr. Alex Mayer is Professor of Civil Engineering and Executive Director of the Center for Environmental Resource Management of the University of Texas at El Paso. Dr. Meyer's teaching and research focuses on finding solutions for water resources problems through modeling, of watersheds and groundwater aquifers. Coupled with human decision-making models, his research has taken place in the Rio Grande Basin, Caribbean, Great Lakes, and Sonora and Veracruz in Mexico. Next, please. Oh, okay. So, yeah, thank you. James Caligari, very well known, a friend of mine, a colleague, is a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey in Arizona Water Sciences Center. He received his PhD from the University of Arizona in Soil and Water Sciences. He has worked since 2007 with groups of the US and Mexican NGOs, agencies, and universities to study transboundary aquifers and rivers along the international border. He works with interdisciplinary teams of scientists to study ecological restoration of watersheds and riparian areas, particularly with respect to groundwater, surface water interactions, and the effects of wildfire on hydrology and carbon and nitrogen cycling. James is also interested in sustainable agriculture and rural living systems. And finally, if you may, Randy Hanson. Randy, again, a colleague of mine and participant of the ISARM Americas Network for many years, is now the president hydrogeologist, One Water Hydrologic, fifth generation Californian, work on the Frontera for over 40 years, consulting and as lead of the U.S. Geological Survey research hydrologist, developing hydrologic methods and water supply analysis of regional watersheds nationally and internationally. As co-developer, he is helping others with climate change analysis and use newest USGS mud flow called One Water for the food and water security analysis of conjunctive use, climate change, sustainability, and adaptation. So there you have it. We're going to start right away with first question that I frame in this way. Remember, these are numerical models this time. So hydrogeological numerical models are built using geological, physical, or chemical boundaries. Now, can they integrate jurisdictional boundaries too? If yes, how? If not, why not? So Alex Meyer, pass it on to you. You had 4 minutes or less if possible. Are you there, Alex?
I am, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, okay. Well, thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to participate in this panel to answer some really interesting questions. And I've really enjoyed the conference so far, and it's spurred my thinking about the kind of work I do in modeling groundwater and groundwater surface water systems. So first of all, to answer the question, I need to acknowledge my collaborators in a project we've been working on for about the last 6 years on groundwater and surface water sustainability in the Paso del Norte region. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment here. So the answer to the question, the naive answer to the question is, of course, why should a jurisdictional boundary make any difference when we set up a numerical model? But of course, the real answer is that it's challenging, and I think in the rest of my slides about in answering the rest of the questions, we'll address this. But to introduce the area where I've been focusing most of my work that we refer to as the Paso del Norte region, it covers a fairly small slice of the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo watershed, beginning about at Elephant Butte Reservoir in New Mexico and ending about 200 miles or a little bit more than 300 kilometers down here at Fort Quitman at the beginning of what we fondly call the Forgotten Reach. So I'm going to speak primarily from experience in transboundary aquifer modeling from this area. And in this region, we have demands coming from cities. So in combination, El Paso, Texas, Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, and Las Cruces, New Mexico. That includes about 2 million people and growing rapidly, especially in Juarez. And then there are several irrigation districts that are arrayed along the Rio Grande, as you can see from color change here on the map that are also exerting demand. And in this region, water is typically over-allocated. This year will be particularly troublesome with very low reservoir levels. In this region, we have conjunctive use with the Rio Grande Rio Bravo water alongside of several aquifers. And because of this conjunctive use and other factors, it's really important to model this system as a system and not just focusing on the groundwater. So next slide, please. So in response to that need, we've developed a systems model. And I'm not going to be talking much, if at all, about distributed numerical groundwater modeling, because in our case, we found that modeling the system and treating the groundwater is fairly simple, just simple zero-dimensional buckets, helped us understand the answers to a lot of questions. And so we've developed this simple, relatively simple system where we have a network of aquifers, river reaches, and users. The focus of our work here is primarily looking at impacts of several stressors on groundwater depletion, primarily from the Hueco-Boson aquifer, which is one of the several aquifers in this region that are shared by both countries and also by more than one state. So,
Alex, you have 30 seconds to finish.
Okay. So we're dealing here with boundaries not just between the US and Mexico, but also between Texas and New Mexico, who are not always on the friendliest terms themselves. And the stressors that we're looking at are climate change, which primarily occurs as through the system as a result of changing snowpack in the headwaters, population change in the cities, and also operational change in river management. And so we think we've been able to attack several jurisdictions in this model. I'm going to tell you about some results in this model applications with my further slides.
Thank you, Alex. So let's move on to the next speaker, James Caligari, please. Same question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Very well.
Oh, good. Excellent. So James Caligari with the USGS. I'm going to talk about these jurisdictional boundaries and how my answer is really yes, we must incorporate them in order to have adequate groundwater models. So I'm going to talk first about the San Pedro River aquifer. We normally think about governmental jurisdiction, but we don't always think about industrial jurisdictions. For example, one of the largest mines in the world is located in Cananea, Sonora. And on the US side of that same aquifer, there's a military base and a small city. And also a US federal designation for maintenance of sustainability of flow and riparian habitat along the San Pedro River. And so the location of that aquifer is in the upper left, between Arizona and Sonora, and the Santa Cruz and San Pedro aquifers are side by side. Next, the Santa Cruz River incorporates on the Arizona side an active management area. There have already been several mostly US only modeling efforts, and those results have been incorporated into a published plan about how to meet water management objectives. The trade relationship between the two countries has resulted in a buildup of manufacturing in Nogales, Sonora, especially, as well as population, with impacts that have increased runoff, decrease in infiltration, and water quality issues. Some of those issues have been taken care of by the binational Nogales International Wastewater Treatment Plant, but the situation is dynamic in terms of wastewater management, with Mexico having constructed its own treatment plant in an adjacent watershed. For the Mexicali-Yuma Valley, the water in this system is highly managed in space, time, and magnitude. It's controlled by jurisdictional boundaries, the 1944 treaty and its minutes, and water rights in each country. One example is a difference between the irrigation districts in the US and the modulos in Mexicali area. with different rules, customs, and water transport infrastructure. So just to summarize, binational factors include pumping. In Sonora, management largely conforms to aquifer boundaries, and Conagua's aquifer water availability reports are updated every few years and are a great starting point for modeling. In Arizona, we really have a patchwork of management rules and entities. So we have tribal nations, we have wildlife refuges, military areas, and national parks. In terms of wastewater, I've already mentioned it for Nogales, but it's a factor in many areas along the border. In water use, we have mining on both sides, differences in agricultural practices, large city with manufacturing versus cities focused on surface trade and tourism. And then just also thinking about predicting the future, one jurisdictional difference that we have is a result of policy differences in fire suppression, which have resulted in difference in wildfire, which affects rainfall, runoff, infiltration, etc. So that's my answer for that.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you for keeping it short, only 3 minutes. All right, so next give it up to Randy Hansen for the same first question. 3 minutes? Four, sorry.
Great, thanks, Alfonso, and thanks for having me join in on this. So the simple answer is yes, we can accommodate all of these kind of jurisdictional boundaries and changes in boundaries, especially in the new One Water Code. We have all kinds of different boundaries that can be assessed with this, including additional budgets. So we have water balance subregions, which are accounting units, groundwater, surface water, landscape, climate, and even sub-budgets of wells and crops and so on. And we're also now tightly coupled with reservoir operations, so that gives some additional layers of budgeting in that context. And we can also now simulate external supplies and demands. Boundaries are dynamic and can change through time and land ownership. So this is a classic example of Cuyama Valley, which straddles 4 counties in California north of Santa Barbara. It was originally a Spanish land grant and some homesteads, but it's been progressively dissected. And because it's groundwater, really that change in boundaries and even land ownership dictates how your water is going to be demanded and supplied. And that has to be a dynamic aspect of modeling. We also have the Rio Bravo Transboundary model, RG-TIM, and I'm going to show an example of that with the southern boundary of the Rincon Valley, the Mesilla and the Caneos Mednos. The Mesilla and the Caneos Mednos represent 53 of the 71 water balance accounting units that we use, which in Mexico includes the Bateria, which is an ancillary supplementary well field used for supplementary well supply for Ciudad Juarez, as well as native and urban subregions. But the water balance subregions honored, though, the groundwater and watersheds, plus international, state, and irrigation districts, and subregions within the irrigation districts that receive different sources of water. Next slide, please. And I just want to go through just kind of how we do this numerically. This is these stippled little areas here are these water accounting or water balance subregions, and look at number 2 and 3. Number 2 is a riparian area. Number 3 is as a dryland area. Next slide, please. And I'm just showing them here. Now we're going to actually, through time, those get divided up, and now we're actually going to turn one from dryland farming to adding wells. So we can do all of this dynamically on the fly, and this is the kind of flexibility that we now have for numerical simulation analysis of these complex supply and demand relationships. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is, sorry, go back one, sorry. So this is just a Cuyama example. We're looking at very simple, about 9 water balanced accounting units in 1949, all the way up to 33 in the 2010-14 region as land was bought and then dissected into additional pieces and whatnot. We actually tracked over 80 landowners in this area with individual accounting and then combine them into these. So this is a very dynamic way of doing this. And again, this straddles 4 counties. So it's very transboundary and was very useful in us understanding how the water was being used and when overexploitation occurred and so on. Next slide, please.
Got 1 minute, Andy.
Finally, just showing part of the Rio Grande here with the 53 water balance subregions in the Mesilla and the Caneos Mednos. this really allowed us to look at the supply and demand simulation for these different subregions in this area. So I'll leave it with that.
That's quite good. Thank you so much, Randy. All right, so let's move on with the second question now, still on the numerical models. I would like you to please name the top 3 challenges or top 4 you think that you encountered in building a numerical model of an aquifer shared by 2 or more countries. And please explain your choices. So we'll begin with Alex Meyer, please. Again, 4 minutes.
Thank you. Yes. So of course I can't just think of 3. I have to think of more challenges, but at least I've categorized them under 3 general categories. And I think the first is fairly obvious maybe to people that have worked across any jurisdictions, whether they're national jurisdictions or state or municipalities, really any scale, that there can be asymmetry in information, in the amount of information that's available, and also asymmetry in terms of the accuracy. And I would say that the area that's been the most difficult for our work in the Paso del Norte region is getting reliable water demand and pumping information, especially for irrigation. And this isn't just a US versus Mexico issue, it's also a New Mexico versus Texas issue where Texas's data on agricultural use is usually estimated just by taking crop acreages and multiplying them by rules of thumb for irrigation needs. Another piece of information, we're working especially in arid and semi-arid basins is very critical, is recharge and magnitudes of recharge, whether they're from natural sources like mountain front recharge, or whether they're from artificial sources such as irrigation water. Those numbers are very
Me atrae todo lo que dejé en la sala de juntas y ¿qué más se le decir?
And also values of storage. So the aquifers that we're dealing with in our region, the trajectory for those aquifers is they're going to be depleted. So we actually need to know how much water is there before freshwater resources are exhausted. Management across boundaries is often fractured, at least the governance is. And of course, that's a policy problem, first of all, but it's also a problem in terms of who has the information, transparency, and so forth. Predictions, a lot of the work that we're doing is about what is going to be the state of aquifers in the future. And so another area where it's important to get agreement as inputs to models is agreements on future water demand, climate change, and any policy changes. So on the right-hand side, I'm showing some output from our systems model that's predicting the cumulative loss of storage starting in 2020 from the Hueco Bolson aquifer. And in putting together the information that we have across boundaries, we're predicting that over the next 50 years, depending on what climate change scenario that you choose to use and population scenario you choose to use, tens of millions more acre feet are going, sorry about the acre feet and not the metric, forgive me. Tens of millions more acre feet are going to be extracted from the aquifer. And estimates of storage of fresh water in this aquifer are on the order, depending on who you believe, 10 to 15 million acre feet. And so we're facing...
You have 30 minutes, Alex.
Sure. We're facing perhaps complete of the fresh water in the next, and all this.
But I'm thinking of not using Amazon to all that because Amazon bad.
Okay, thank you. Please, can you mute your microphones? So we are having intersection between the speaker and other people. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the next speaker, please. James, same question, number 2.
Okay. So I chose three challenges. So social factors, shared information, and data scarcity. So which a previous speaker also mentioned, but I think I'll talk about them in a slightly different perspective. So in terms of social factors, thinking about institutional asymmetry, so how does each agency or organization function? So what are their capabilities? We have governments, we have NGOs, we have universities. As have been mentioned in previous panels, everyone contributes their own individual abilities and skills. So it really makes a difference having everyone at the table. Politics. Obviously, we have different politics occurring at federal, state, and local levels. We have changes in who the elected officials are. We have changes in policy that occur over time. So that can be a real challenge in terms of funding, in terms of priorities, research priorities. Is the international border a priority? We also have differences in history, culture, and language, and these cannot be forgotten in how we work together. Those are always functioning in the background. And obviously, between the US and Mexico, there's significant difference, a significant history over time. Language can be a problem when you're having meetings without an interpreter. Who is bilingual? Are things going to be written in two languages? And then individual personnel, what skills do they bring to the table? What are their personalities? Do they work together? These are all critical, challenging pieces that often get overlooked. In terms of shared information, how do we share information? Do we need rules? Is sharing controlled? When do we share information? So in the minute 323 in the Colorado River Delta, we have an information sharing agreement that partners have agreed upon. Data will not be public until after the 10-year duration of the minute, but we can share among us. What can be shared? Who can share information? For example, author publication rights. Do they get first ability to share their information? Once you agree upon that, how do you actually share information? Do you have the same data collection methods binationally or in different jurisdictions? So we want to build binational databases. We're doing that in the case of the Colorado River Delta. What platform do you use? Are you going to do data collection integrated into that platform? How do you review data? And then moving towards information scarcity. As was mentioned before, we never have enough. So how are we going to fill those gaps? What estimation methods are we going to use? There's usually dozens to choose from for any given parameter in a hydrologic model. Again, what if our data collection methods are different? How do we, and you'll see in that lower right corner an example of a binational soils map. There's no way that we have time and money to redo those soil surveys again. So how do we overcome that? How do we harmonize? In the case of geology, we did. For two of the aquifers, the San Pedro and Santa Cruz, we went about harmonizing geology across the borders. So that's my response.
Very good. Thank you so much, James. It's still on time. So we move on to the next speaker on the same question, the last one. That's Randy, please. Same thing.
Very good. All right. Well, the big thing, as James has just adeptly described, is really data sharing. And really, we're looking at accessible data for what we now consider to be self-updating models. This includes data sharing protocols, linkages, as well as automated linkages to land-based data networks and remotely sensed data products and analysis. The big thing is really input and observation data. We need to have all these types of data for integrated hydrologic modeling. And in particular, we need land ownership and land use. And it turns out that land use is probably one of the largest data gaps in the world. And geochemical data is also very important, both for conceptual framework and transport. Geochemical attributes, in particular salinity typing, by analyzing and sampling for all the halogens. stable and unstable isotopes. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to farmers and told them that their water is 10,000 years old and how sobering that was. Emerging contaminants, natural contaminants are very essential. And the thing that unfortunately many people miss, and that's end member samples. So you really can't do mixing and transport analysis without capturing the end member samples of the sources of that. Next slide, please. And just this, I want to kind of give a layered hierarchy of workflow for self-updating models. We're really headed towards quite a bit of infrastructure on this in many places. And really, it starts with smart farms, houses, and factories, and then it goes to smart agriculture, cities, and industry and reservoirs, and then to smart valleys, and ultimately smart watersheds, and as well as land, satellite, drone systems. And what I'm going to use here as an example of that is the wheat basket of Mexico, which is down in Sonora, the Rio Yaqui irrigation district, where they have 530 wells, reservoirs, the land, the climate, and everything is on a complete system that they built with some very great and smart Mexican engineers there at the Rio Yaqui irrigation district with Siemens from Germany. And they can tell you everything about everything that's going on all the time. And these are the data streams that I think are essential for self-updating models and the kind of structure that is needed in this context. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much. It's really short now. All right, so we have, we're gonna move on to the next question, please. Question number 3. Right. So in this case, what I was thinking is, what are the processes? Now we talk about parameters, we talk about challenges, type of models, but this time I'd like you to focus a little bit more on the physical chemical processes that should be modeled and that are specific to transboundary aquifers and also useful for search management. So the floor is to you, Alex. Same thing.
Thank you. Well, I guess like any other modeling effort, it depends on what the management goals are in terms of deciding which processes should be modeled. So it's maybe a very broad question, but and difficult perhaps to pin down to say the specific cases of transboundary aquifers, what process should be modeled. But I'll just speak from the processes that I've been focused on in our work in the Paso del Norte region. And that includes salinity. We have brackish and freshwater portions of our aquifers. And so it's of course important to understand the hydrostratigraphy in terms of the presence of the brackish and the freshwater, which would help further understanding the response of the salinity of the groundwater due to changes in pumping and recharge. And so the model needs to be able to reproduce the flow and transport patterns in response to pumping and recharge. And this is critical in our region here because so far on one side of the border, at least for the Hueco-Boson aquifer, the salinities are typically higher on the US side, but they tend to be increasing also on the Mexican side. On the US side, we're already doing desalination in El Paso. And so one of the questions then is, at what point might the city of Juarez also have to start doing desalination? And those are, the salinity issues are related also to pumping on either side of the border. And historically, El Paso, decades ago, El Paso was substantially larger than Juarez. And so was pumping much greater portions of groundwater than Juarez, and that has flipped over the last couple of decades, where the growth of Juarez has easily outstripped that of El Paso. And so the groundwater models seem to indicate that flow is going now from the US side to the Mexican side. What that has to do with developing policy or not remains to be seen. And also, in addition to wanting to know the directions and the magnitude of cross-border flow, the stepping back to a zero-dimensional approach, it's important to be able to understand the contributions to aquifer depletion over the past and how that might change in the future with regard to pumping on each side of the US and Mexico border and also Texas and New Mexico. And surface water, groundwater interactions are important in many groundwater systems, and here they're critically important from a couple perspectives that I've already mentioned. Conjunctive use between surface water and groundwater in this region, but also what's become a very serious issue and is the issue associated with at least part of a Supreme Court case which pits Texas against New Mexico, and that's the impacts of pumping on seepage from the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo channel. That's not just an important issue of Texas versus New Mexico, but also U.S. and U.S. and New Mexico. Or sorry, U.S. and Mexico. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Alex. All right, so let's move on with James Caligari, please. Same question.
Okay, so I started first with something a little bit different from what Alex was talking about, in that we can decide on a lot of processes to include, but we really have to agree binationally on what processes can be included. So these binational models really, or across jurisdictional boundaries, need the consent of everyone involved. So that's a really critical factor in success, especially if you're dealing between governments. Then, as was already mentioned, they need to adapt to the individual aquifer. So what are the processes occurring there? And what are the processes, the jurisdictional processes that are there? I've given some examples here that are, each of them is relevant to the aquifers that, at least that I'm studying along the border. So for chemical transport, what kind of data are available? Typically, if we do have some, it may not be more detailed data like metals or organic chemicals. We might have chloride, sodium, pH. So we might need to use those for establishing limiting scenarios. So how fast could a metal be transported, or a chemical constituent of concern? We might be able to use pH as a surrogate for redox and how metals are moving through a system. So groundwater surface water interactions, is recharge important? There are some areas where recharge is probably not occurring on a scale that is really that important to a particular aquifer. Is groundwater being captured? Is surface water being captured? Is there a riparian habitat component? You can see there, she clicked on my little video of showing some groundwater surface water interactions there. That was actually for the pulse flow in 2014 in the Colorado River Delta. So what about flow in the unsaturated zone? Is it a thick unsaturated zone? Is there a lot of water stored there? Modeling can be used to test the timescales of recharge if that's occurring, or does recharge occur mostly in channel areas and areas of focused flow? Thinking about flow with variable density, in that the figure on the right side, that's an image of flow modeling with variable density that I took off of the internet. So salty water may or may not be a problem, even if it's in the area, because it may be deep because of density differences, salty water getting deeper. So maybe not a concern for vegetation, or if most water use is from shallow aquifers. But we can test this with modeling. We can also test coastal seawater intrusion versus groundwater interface. Is that changing due to drought or pumping or other factors? Then we have flow in fractured and karstic aquifers, which is very difficult to model adequately. How do you approach that? There are no good numerical models out there. If there is, I would love to hear about it, but I've never heard of one that does an adequate job. So we've got mining areas in Arizona and Sonora that are in fractured rock with chemical transport. We've got karst in the eastern part of the border zone, which is hugely important. Moving to climate change, what is your time scale of interest? If it's short term, maybe you don't need to consider that. But if it's a long term, it probably should be represented. And how do we represent it? Is it with coupled models of, how long?
30 seconds.
Okay, perfect, thanks. Do we use coupled models with climate downscaling, or do we just use the precipitation record for that particular area? Differences in governmental perspectives are important for climate change because as a government entity, we have increased scrutiny in studies involving climate change. So increased focus. And then finally, rainfall runoff models. Are you going to use those to assess changes in land cover, land use, agriculture, as well as the effects of wildfire? So thanks.
Thank you, James. All right, so we still have question number 3. I'll give it the floor to Randy, please. Okay.
Great. Well, the physical processes are obviously linked to water sources. This is important that you get all the different water sources in there and that you have coupled flow. This is conjunctive use, and this is the issue all over the world, is conjunctive use. And that includes groundwater, surface water interactions, as well as capture and delivery interference from pumpage. Land use is a huge issue and really needs to be addressed more fully in many areas. And water use and land use are probably the biggest data gaps worldwide. Climate change and climate variability are going to dictate sustainability and adaptation, really. Reservoir operations need to really be part of these kind of models because they are one of the major contributors of water and the interaction between groundwater and surface water supplies. One that luckily has been brought up both by both of my other members here is salinity. And one of the things that's really a problem is salinity leaching. The loss of arable land and reduced productivity and salt accumulation is really a huge problem. And if you're doing leaching to reduce salinity because of your saline waters you're using, you're actually creating 10 to 50% more water needed for leaching. So you're pumping more, you're diverting more. And remember that 1 acre foot of water with a salt concentration of 735 parts per million is a ton of salt. So that's really a lot. And that these are really a loss of productivity, as was shown on the lower Arkansas River Valley over 120 years. But there's also a lot of secondary effects, and salinity is a huge issue, I think, on most of the transboundary aquifers that we are looking at. Next slide, please. And so we're going to just kind of go through this for the Rio Grande. So you have seepage next, and then you have irrigation next, water crop use next, drainage for reuse. That gets back to the Rio Grande for rediversion, but then you have groundwater next, and you put a well in, and then that creates a depletion, which then interferes with this process. Climate variability is really huge. This is some new work that we're just getting ready to publish. I'm working with Dr. Renteria at UACH in Chihuahua, and this is some new data here. This is tree ring indices from the Casas Grandes area, and you can see that there's long periods on the upper left graph of periods of wetness and dryness based on these, including the mega drought of the late 1500s. There's some question that we're in a new mega drought from 2000 to 2020. But what we see in the lower graph on the left is that the major dry periods are 12 to 41 years, which are really coincident with the PDO cycles, Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And yet, if you go up at the upper right graph, there's been 35 5-year delivery cycles under the Treaty of the Rivers. And they're based on 5-year cycles, and it's really not clear to me why they're 5-year cycles when it's obvious from the historical record that they should probably be 15-year cycles as the Mexicans had originally wanted. And we're also looking at the Rio Concho supplies a large fraction of the total delivery from the 6 tributaries, especially in dry years. And in particular, you get the groundwater interaction from the fact that the climate treaty the 280 wells were installed in 94, 95, and the La Boquilla and FIM reservoirs were not delivering water. Next slide. And again, just salinity here. This is a terrible situation here with abandoned agriculture in a closed basin. Next slide. And then finally, the fact that the Bureau of Reclamation is replacing Colorado River water with deliveries of saline groundwater from these different regions here is another issue of salinity. And that we worked on optimization of these deliveries. I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Randy. Right on time. Okay, so let's move on to the last question, the fourth and last question. So we heard about processes and parameters, and boundaries and whatnot. So let's close this panel with this question here. We would like to know if you have a case, a real example of transboundary aquifer model anywhere in the world, doesn't have to be US, Mexico, which has been successful as a management tool, as I said at the beginning, or as an information tool, or as a data integration and harmonization tool, or even all the above. So we're going to have again 4 minutes-ish, and then we'll wrap it up. Alex, it's yours.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up 3 examples, one of which is already in effect, and then a couple examples that are related to the project I've been telling you about. And so on the right-hand side of this slide, if you could look there first at this, the Genovese Transboundary Aquifer, I think probably almost all of us are familiar with this case and the agreement between Switzerland and France. And I put up on this slide here, if you look towards the bottom, this is it for the groundwater modeling. I love it, right? It's essentially just a little algebraic equation that describes how much France has to pay Switzerland each year for the cost of recharging groundwater. And I looked maybe didn't spend enough time to find out whether there were groundwater models that were supporting this nice little equation. I know they use a lot of groundwater modeling to update this very simple relationship here. But as far as I know, groundwater models are not being used. And so I just bring this up as a case that we can really be potentially simple and yeah. So on the left-hand side of this slide, we are in the next month going to be conducting a series of sessions that we're calling a serious groundwater game. And the purpose of the game is to engage stakeholders in the future of the Hueco-Bolson aquifer, which is being depleted, has been depleted over the last several decades or so, and is in danger of being completely depleted, at least on the freshwater side. So the purpose of the discussions that we plan will occur during the serious games is to explore new binational management solutions to prolong the life of the Hueco-Bolson. And we have a series of sessions you can see described in these boxes here that are primarily focused on municipal and industrial users. We're focusing just on a smaller set of the stakeholders and a somewhat constrained sector to begin with to discuss these potential solutions, but we also want to bring in on either end of this session other stakeholders, government entities, and so on. So this is future. It's going to be happening again in about a month's time, but we hope that this will be an example of where this systems model that I described earlier in my slides can be used to come to at least a hypothetical agreement about transboundary water sharing. And then the third example I want to talk about is also within our group. We've been working hard at developing a graphical user interface for our models. It's called SWIM, Sustainable Water Through Integrated Modeling Project. And I'm going to put some information about it in a chat box here. So with this graphical user interface, we've used it in several stakeholder workshops, and we're advancing that graphical user interface. And one thing we're doing is we're holding some workshops to evaluate the usability of the interface. And I'm going to put in a chat box an invitation for any of you to participate in usability testing of this interface. And then these are just some suggested boundaries to think about, remembering history. Some of this might be controversial, but we have to give John Wesley Powell, I guess, a shout out for recognizing that that we maybe should be adjusting our jurisdictional boundaries along watersheds. Of course, he didn't do the greatest job in the world about representing the Mexican boundary. And so you might look on the right for what that used to look like. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. That's quite provocative. That's nice. All right, so let's move on with the same question. Now, James, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I just want to note on this one, can't quite see it, on that I'm going to be talking about a study that was carried out by the Sonoran Institute in conjunction with the University of Baja California. And it was published in 2017. There's a little video here in the upper right corner that was developed by the folks at Hydrogeosphere, just to talk about how coupled modeling is useful in understanding many processes. So the objective of the study that the Sonoran Institute published about the Colorado River Delta was to determine the extent of riparian habitat in the central part of the Colorado River in Mexico that can be sustained by groundwater under different scenarios of water management. So their methods, at least the modeling methods, was to model the depth of groundwater under different scenarios, including environmental flows, changes in agricultural return flows, subsurface of entry or variations in that of water coming from upriver, and then changes in evapotranspiration. One of those changes being driven by defoliation of plants by the salt cedar beetle. So the idea was then to apply the model results to a threshold analysis of groundwater for different types of riparian habitat to predict the spatial extent of that habitat. So how do changes in groundwater level allow different kinds of riparian vegetation to grow? Looking at that central figure, so you can see the binational content of it, the larger, so mostly pretty much all the modeling was carried out by Eliana Rodriguez, who's on this for various parts of her master's, PhD thesis, and then for this report. Those are binational models. The small pink zone is the actual modeling, the actual inset model considered for this study. And of course, Eliana threw out a comment if I make any mistakes on this. But the results were suggesting that changes in agricultural return flows will likely be the greatest driver of groundwater increases and decreases, and thus a driver of riparian habitat potential of all those factors. The results suggest that riparian habitat in the Central Delta region is highly vulnerable to irrigation district agricultural water management decisions, which are in turn influenced by larger scale national and binational water management decisions. So the way that this integrates information, first of all, the models and all the data that went to support those had to be integrated and harmonized across the border. It also provides integration of the binational team, which is the joint effort, all of us looking at how we can support riparian vegetation with environmental water that is allocated by minute 323. So treaty-based water management is part of the implication of this. And it's also helped us to understand what methods need to be carried out binationally in order to help support flow. So that's my example.
Can't hear you, Alfonso.
Okay, I'm sorry. So we're gonna move to the last speaker here, Randy, and then we wrap it up later after the questions and answers.
Okay, well, our example is the Lower Rio Grande. We have the Rio Grande Transboundary Integrated Hydrologic Model, as well as our previous publication on that with what was sometimes called the MIMIC model in 2013. This was used by the Bureau of Reclamation for their environmental impact statement of assessing the operations and future climate change and agreements with the irrigation districts in the area, EBID and EP1. It was developed by TAP originally with myself and others, Wolfgang Schmidt, and developed for future USBR operations and litigation support. And unfortunately, there was no data cooperation. So even though we represented the Bateria in the Canelos Mednos, we could not get data, even though we had a data sharing agreement from many of the Mexican agencies. And hopefully it'll be used in the future by other projects like the USGA Water Use Project. Next slide, please. And just kind of give you an idea what that looks like. In the US, it's a 57-43% split between the two irrigation districts. We also have an obligation of a delivery to Mexico of 60,000 acre feet. Next slide, please. And really what we're seeing here is that we have an increased water demand because of hardening of demand with a shift to more pecan orchards. And this is also happening in Chihuahua and the Rio Conchos and some other places as well. So they're getting rid of the seasonal crops like cotton and whatnot. And so we can see that, and we can actually model and assess that to the slide to the upper right of the total farm delivery requirement. You can really see where it swaps during the dry years that are highlighted as droughts to be mainly groundwater because there's not enough water in the reservoir to supply water, so it's being supplemented. And in the lower graph, we can actually see what the releases and deliveries are by allocation and how that's variable through time as well. It's also subject to drought, and we can model all of that. Next slide, please. And just groundwater budget, again, here we were actually able to kind of establish that there was storage depletion, streamflow capture going on. But in this case, it's cyclic, but it's been sustained in the last years that we modeled, 2003 to 2014, which might be part of that mega drought that people are claiming is occurring. So that's certainly something that we see, that there's quite a bit of storage depletion and streamflow capture that interfered with deliveries of surface water that were agreed upon. Next slide, please. And it's a very complex river system, and we model all of this, but this is similar to many other river systems between the reservoir and the point of diversion, Sequia Madre. It's about a 7-day river system for that water to get all the way down there, and this is similar in other places in Nevada and the Salinas Valley of Monterey. These are long river systems that have to be assessed in different time frames. And so next. And really, this is a complex thing with 16 inflows, 71 diversion points. But the big thing is there's 20 to 30% water reuse. And that's really part of the agreement. And we can simulate that aspect of it. Next slide, please. And so here we're actually looking at the surface water deliveries is the vertical axis versus the stream flow at Caballo Reservoir with the actual release. And we can see it's greater than 1 to 1. So this is the operational flows versus divertible water. Next. And we can also see that we can simulate the deliveries to Mexico. So this is important. So we're actually being able to see some of these things. Next. And in particular, we're also looking at the operational releases versus divertible water, which is sometimes referred to as the D2 curve, which is the agreement between the Bureau of Reclamation and the two irrigation districts. And so we're doing a very good job of that as well. Next. Next slide, please. That's it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Just right on time. Okay, so before passing it on to, I don't know if it's Sam or Rosario, but I'd like to say that this is, I know it's the last panel, it's the last part of the 2 days conference, and people are perhaps tired and hungry. But I'd like to say that I checked on the participants, 122 of the modeling. Incredible. Well, at the end, it's only 114, but still, it's a good quorum. I thank you so much, and I'm sure there are many questions. Yes, a big applause to speakers. I can do that myself, or I don't know, remember, Rosario,
yeah,
you do it?
I can help you out. I can help you out. So I'm going to put a lot of the questions. So we received questions from Alan Valle, Joel Carrillo, Jorge Ramirez, Charles Bethany, Alessia, Debbie, Roger, Eliana. There are 2 questions that I think they come hand to hand. And those are kind of a little bit beyond the modeling in the socialization of science, socialization of models. So those are the following. So the first one is from Debbie. Can the panelists talk a bit about whether they or someone in their team prepare a layperson summaries of findings, including what is not known, and what they think are the best mechanisms of getting the results to the hands of binational policymakers, water users, local communities, and other actors.
Can I take a shot at that first?
Yep.
I guess that a couple of things that I mentioned in my last slides were that with this user interface to our systems model, where our plan there is to really put the model in the hands of anyone, you know, whether they're a rate-paying person paying for their water bill or government at the highest levels. And with this interface, we're of course trying to make it easier to use the models. But we're also trying to learn from how people use the models. So there's information that's collected as people use it to try to understand what scenarios people are most interested in, what sorts of outputs that they're interested in. And that will be reflected back in the iterative design of the graphical user interface. And then the second thing I'd mentioned was the serious games workshop sessions that are going to occur in November, and that the deliberations in that workshop where people are going to be looking at policies for potentially reducing pumping in the Hueco-Bolson, that's the calculations that the stakeholders or the participants will be working with there are based on calculations from our systems model. So we have a few ways we're trying to make these models accessible and usable in the stakeholder environment.
Yeah, thanks. Any response from Randy, James?
Yeah, I can respond. One example of doing that, well, first let me say that that's been a part of our project since the beginning. Sharon Megdal and her shop, the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona, is particularly good at getting information out, holding seminars. We have done presentations at IBWC Fora several times. We have presented in Mexico to local watershed council in the San Pedro. And then most recently, master's thesis published by Amy Roseborough. She just graduated this year, where she was developing something similar to what Alex was talking about, modeling system that is specifically designed to help stakeholders and people who live in watersheds explore the processes that are likely to be occurring in theirs, and to have that be a flexible tool so that it can be transferred from one aquifer to another fairly readily.
If I could just jump in real quick, we typically do this in our USGS reports. We have a model limitations section, and we go through the frailties because, unfortunately, for better or worse, everyone seems to want to think that models are gospel, and they're not. They typically do tell us what we don't know, and in particular, they're most useful in identifying what's infeasible. As opposed to, even though we're striving for what's feasible. But a lot of the data is really a big uncertainty. You know, we don't know land use in the Rio Grande situation. We're not able to get pumpage from Texas or monthly pumpage from the Batteria in Mexico. And you know, even things like stream flow are anywhere from 5 to 20% uncertain, stream flow gauge information. So there's a lot of uncertainty that's typically never talked about, and there's many layers of that need to be understood in making decisions.
Okay, so it's going to be the last questions. As we will say in Mexico, la última y nos vamos. So the last cup and we're live. So this is actually a question from well, we have two very good questions, but following on that topic. So right now you are involved in stakeholders and decision makers and so on. What I'm going to put in the chat is a question from Eliana. And basically she says, in one occasion, a representative of the federal institution in Mexico they said that the only people interested in transboundary groundwater models were researchers. How can we change the perspective of others in these tools that are very important and very needed? At all levels, from decision makers, water users, the general society, what are the lessons learned to actually to switch this around from your experience?
I can take a crack at that, or Alex, did you want to speak?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So I'll give the example of San Pedro model. This was built before the days of the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program, but there was a concerted effort by NGOs and government entities to gather together all the stakeholders in the watershed, elected officials, et cetera. And it took a sustained effort over many years of coming back and having questions and coming back and having questions, and a sustained commitment to incorporating suggestions and really listening to stakeholders. What are your priorities? And what happened is that one day I was out getting water level data, and the mayor of this local city pulls up, and he was telling me about, you know, how we needed to change the model to incorporate riparian ET and like this incredibly sophisticated input that 5 years prior he would never have been able to have. So I think those are the sustained lessons: listening, sustained input, having that engagement there over a long period of time, and knowing ahead of time that that has to happen in order to build up trust and understanding.
Yeah, thanks, James. Hey, Alex, Randy?
I could quickly just jump in and say that perhaps here in California, and not necessarily international transboundary, but we were maybe a little ahead of the curve with this, with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And in fact, models are becoming an essential tool for all of these sustainability agencies that are being developed all over California, and many of which are transboundary. And really, even though the thresholds for the 6 deadly sins of overexploitation are based on monitoring networks and thresholds developed for them, really the models go hand in hand, because it's the only way you can look at the future or alternatives is with the model. So it's really become an institutional cornerstone, at least here in California, and I hope for transboundary as well.
Yeah, well, first I want to say that the items that James talked about, building trust and how long it takes to get people to trust the individuals involved and then trust the model. And I think the question in itself is great, because as researchers, we can get a little bit trapped in our own bubble and not really pay attention to what people really want to know, which is again what, you know, repeating really what James was saying there. So it is a long it's a long process. I think models, you know, if they're done right, both technically and then also in terms of the explanation, they can be great conversation pieces. I think it was Randy that was saying that models aren't always have their limitations. I don't know if he went as far to say that all models are wrong, but some are useful, which is a quote I think we all need to live by. But yeah, they can be useful in terms of getting the conversations going. You know, I think in a lot of cases, people know what the problems are, and they may not need a numerical model with, you know, thousands of nodes really to know what the problems are and the potential solutions. But the model, again, it provides this sort of common area of conversation, which I think they're really big role, perhaps as much as or more than actually coming up with quantitative technical solutions. And then just one last thing is that, unfortunately, I think most of us are driven by crises. So maybe now we're going to understand a lot more about the Rio Conchos, you know, because it's a crisis. And with groundwater, it's tough, because groundwater is just sort of this slow-moving train, right? The train may be going to destruction, but it's it's a little bit harder to get people interested in groundwater, obviously because it's sight unseen. But once you start talking about, I think, depletion in a matter of decades, hopefully that gets people's attention. But it's, again, the result of a crisis that is about, that may be happening.
Yeah, and in that one, thanks everyone. We're running a little bit late, and I also would like to thank all the people that send the questions. I will send the questions to all of you guys. So, I think this is super good information and comments. But with this, I think we'll wrap it up. Rosario.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Alfonso, and the speakers of this last panel. This was really, really enlightening. The questions were really good, actually. Alfonso, thank you for that. That really opened up the kind of the figure that we have in our minds of a model, right? Is commonly recognized as very complex and not easily understandable by a lot of people, restricted to scientists, probably the understanding. But this panel really opened up the discussion to a broader understanding and the applicability of those models to actual current issues that we have right now. And yes, Alex, you're right. We're now, the Rio Conchas is now more popular, definitely, and it's going to need more models. That's the basics. We need to start where we need to start. So now I'm going to move to the wrap up of this conference. Sadly, it's going to an end. We don't want to, push too hard on your patience, on your time, on your commitments. But this was really been a grateful and learning, rich, and you can add all the adjectives that you want, experience. Not just for my personal perspective, not for the knowledge that we have gained in such a short time, but we were able to see each other, hear each other. I mean, we are thinking about the same issues at the same time. So this is really surreal, and this is really great. So I'm going to start with giving the word to the best co-host we could have. Well, first, the best bodyguard of this event, and of course, the Associate Director of the Permanent Forum of Binational Waters. Sam, please, your final thoughts as representative of the forum.
Here, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. I would like to thank very specifically Gabriela, Elia Tapia, Saul, Sarita, James, Jesus. Rosario and I, we were kind of at the beginning here, but they've been the one doing a lot of the work, so I'm good. Shout out for them. The other one, thanks to what I mentioned, thanks to everyone, thanks to all of you. 100 yesterday, 140. Today in the peak we had 120, and everyone behaved super well. This speaks volumes of the community that we're building here, and of the group of people that we are sharing. And last but not least, Rosario. This is. I have to say that a lot of this came through the vision of Rosario. So Rosario, congratulations, muchas felicidades. And then thanks everyone. We're building a super good community. You're gonna see more events coming. Thanks everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Samuel. And I'll wrap up at the end, but I'm gonna give the word now to our co-host of this conference, which is Agustin Breña. We work pretty close every single day for the last year to make this happen. So very proud, very honored to work with you, Agustin. Please take the floor now.
Thank you, Rosario. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, on behalf of IMTA's director, Dr. Adrian Pedroso, I would like to thank the keynote speakers, Chris Meany and Rick Hogeboom, for their outstanding presentations. The other speakers as well, Carolina Escobar and Edith Kaufer, for providing a perspective of water and human rights within a transboundary context. The panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience, and finally Rosario and her team for their dedication and commitment. If I remember well, the idea of this conference came out from Rosario more than 1 year ago, and she and the organizing committee, Samuel Sandoval, Gabriel Eckstein, Sharon Megdal, just to name a few, did a really good job in planning and organizing this conference. In spite of the COVID outbreak that made all of us reconsider everything. So everyone clap your hands for Rosario, the Texas A&M folks, and the organizing committee. In general, I'm very happy of seeing how Mexicans and Americans, although we also had output from Deborah, a Canadian, Alfonso, a Mexican-Canadian, and Rick from Netherlands, can sharing ideas, discuss, and work together in proposing long-term solutions for the present and future challenges that our shared water resources are facing. Finally, I would like to announce that all the output of this conference deserves to be communicated among the scientific and decision-making community. We did not only discuss how innovation and creativity can be used to formulate new strategies that accelerate a more sustainable water management, sound governance, and less water conflicts like the ones we have seen this year. Instead, we went far beyond that, and we basically suggested how the future of transboundary water management should look like by providing a new vision for binational water security between Mexico and the United States. So Rosario and myself are considering to write a peer-reviewed paper, and we'll contact you pretty soon. Thank you all of you for spending your time yesterday and today, and that's it. Bye-bye.
No te vayas, Agustín. Hold on. Thank you, Agustín. It was really a pleasure to work with you, with INTA, and of course, all the forum staff that Samuel mentioned. I mean, you are the dream team. We couldn't do anything of this without you. And of course, the planning committee, the advisory committee, all of you, the speakers that graciously accept to be part of this effort. This was really great. A couple of things besides what Agustín mentioned, we are starting to work on a peer-reviewed publication, Transboundary Groundwater Management in the U.S.-Mexico border from a water security perspective. And we will move with this, and you will be contacted for this as well. That's one good news. The second good news, we are working on a groundwater summit as well, Transboundary Groundwater Summit, that will be sent to you in probably a week. We're going to publish that on the website. We're going to try to advertise that as well, and probably in the media as well, use it to, to start using the information we have here for out there, make it out there, public, use it to whomever needs it. So we're going to spare the word and share it with the community as a whole. So wait for those documents to come in. Don't forget that all the presentations from yesterday and today, they are in the agenda, they're on the website. The complete original presentations for the presentations for today, we deleted the references, the last pages, the beginning of the pages. So the original presentations are in there in the website for your knowledge. The videos will be posted in a couple of days as well. You notice we were live streaming and recording everything for the people who missed some of this important information. And just a last thought before I let you go to lunch or sleep or whatever you want to do. If I learned something today and yesterday, and I want to share that with you, there's one thing, one underlying thing here that it might sound like not very important, but is communication. Sometimes we think as a given, we think that's not going to be an issue. We don't think it's a complicated issue we should think about. But really, if you start, when you start to addressing any complicated issue, everything starts with effective communication. And this is really what it's all about, because without that, we are unable to build what we need to build to improve our water resources management in the region, which is trust. The only way to build trust, because that's the other thing that we have been hearing over the last years, months, and 2 days, how do we build trust? We need to start communicating efficiently with each other and permanently, and because that's the only way to comprehend, to understand, to respect the others' perspectives, the neighbors, their users, their needs, their problems. We need to be able to communicate each other in order to build trust, because trust is the only way, really the only way to move forward on a binational context, especially between Mexico and the US. And we have that. I mean, we have a precious border region. We are the 5th economy of the world. Business around, I mean, we export, economy between Texas and Mexico is $1.6 billion a day. I mean, they take care of themselves. They speak to each other. It's money involved, right? So they speak to each other. And culturally, we're linked. Families speak to each other. Culture, it's stronger than we think. But when it comes to water, who speaks for water? Somebody has to speak for water, and that has to be us. And that's what the forum is all about. And that's what these meetings and efforts is all about. We need to speak for water, because water definitely is not going to speak for itself. I mean, it's doing as much as it can, but it's enough. And that reminds me of the calaverita that Gilbert and Aya made yesterday about water. It's really water talking, and that's why he won that calaverita. And if you have time, go back and look at that and read that. It's very, very nice, and it really speaks of ourselves. Because if we don't take care of water, I mean, who's going to take care of the border region? So with that, I'm going to leave you. If anyone wants to give a comment, questions or whatever, please let us know. Continue the discussion on the blog. We are here in the panel. I mean, in the forum.
Rosario.
Yeah, Samuel.
Rosario, yesterday it was Ray. Ray also camps, who also sent us a very nice calaverita that I'm putting on the chat. And he explained it, but this is also another, as you're saying, that everything is connected. This is a way for us to not only link this kind of scientific portion, but also more of the cultural or the binational culture that we're building here. And it was about water dances anyway. Super cool thoughts that water dances are not only in itself water, but also a person that is called water dances. And that water dances confuse the scientists. And they are underground, invisible, hidden, but fed by clouds and consumed by flowers. Flowers that grow on thorns with skeletons, the water dances. So anyway, super cool yesterday. It's been super cool. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you everyone. Really reach out to us and wait to hear from us again. We're going to be back. We're going to be back next month with more stuff. Water talks, science talks. Coming soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Really great. Marusia,
we can have some music now, Gabby, if you can. Thank you, our interpreters, the best interpreters ever.
Yes, gracias a todos.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists.
Jorge.
Thank you to our friends, colleagues, everyone. I mean, we know everyone by now, so it's great to see you. Thank you. Big applause to all of you. Check out the mutes. And big applause to all of
muchas
you.
gracias.
To all of
Muchas
us.
gracias a todos los que estuvieron aquí en el canal de español. Estamos tratando de hacer esto para que sea disponible, que no dependa del idioma. Muchas gracias por participar, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Y bueno, pues van a escuchar más de nosotros. De verdad, muy agradecido. Luzma.
Best questions ever.
Great guys, thank you for the conference.
Busy in the chat.
Gracias Rosario, gracias Sam, gracias Agustín.
Antonio, we don't hear you.
Bye.
Muchas gracias Debbie, Javier. Ya nos vemos.
Bye guys.
James, Luzma.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Nos vemos.
Gracias.
Marusia, mucho gusto. Gracias, nos vemos.
Rubén Chávez.
Sarita, Cuauhtémoc, ahí estás. Gracias.
Cuauhtémoc, gracias.
Adiós.
Gracias a usted. Ahí estamos, Rafael. Ah, está en español, espérame.
Estamos en español.
Ahora sí, Cuauhtémoc, ¿qué pasó?
Who speaks
No,
Spanish
gracias a ustedes,
here?
que todos me escuchan.
Yo
Sí,
no.
sí te escucho. Muchas gracias.
No, pues hasta la próxima, esperemos y vuelva a ser pronto.
Sam, ¿estás en
Sí,
español?
sí, gracias por la participación. Alan, muchas
Hablemos en español
muchas
ahora.
gracias por estar aquí.
Our next
Bueno,
event.
muchas
Será en
gracias.
español.
Ahí estamos. José,
Bueno, gracias a todos. Joel Carrillo de este lado.
por ahí deben
Gracias,
andar
Joel.
todos. El Roger,
Oye, Rosario, por favor, ve el último
Laura,
mensaje que
David,
envié, por favor.
David Eduardo, muchas gracias.
Rosario.
Rubén Chávez, qué bueno que están.
Saludos, doctor. Gusto en saludarlo.
Gracias por participar, Jesús.
Chat.
José.
En el chat mandé un último
Jaime,
mensaje
Diego, Martín.
sobre lo que tú
Carla.
dijiste al final. Que todo el mundo se olvida del agua.
Del árbol.
Del agua, se olvida del agua. Y la idea está precisamente en cómo se toman los términos. ¿Sí?
¿Quién habla por el agua?
Joel.
Muchas gracias a todos, muchachos.
Joel.
Qué bueno.
Joel, Rosario, Sam, Gaby,
Nos vemos en la
todos
próxima.
estamos aquí hablando por el agua.
Bueno, pero que no nos metan en el otro punto. Gracias, hasta luego.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Una última pregunta. ¿Me escuchan?
Espérame. Ahí está.
Rivera, thank you very much. Radu,
¿Me escuchan?
Laura.
Y ahora
José
sí ya te
Luis,
escuchamos. Me tuve que cambiar al canal.
Ashley.
Dime, Cuauhtémoc.
Gracias, sí, creo que estoy en el canal
Everyone.
equivocado.
No, estás en el de español, está bien.
Las preguntas que les solicitaron a los panelistas que se
Cuauhtémoc,
respondieran
¿estás hablando
las
en
van a tener
español?
como un documento
¿Estás en el
especial.
canal en español?
Bueno, déjame hablar con Rosario.
Ah,
Yo creo que
ok,
sí.
es que no escucho.
Muchas de tus preguntas,
Señor. Hola, estoy en español.
ahora sí ya. Oye, Rosario, nos están preguntando si vamos a tener las preguntas en un documento. Yo creo que sí. Ya el documento ya tenemos todas las preguntas.
Ajá.
Sí,
Las
de
vamos
hecho,
a enviar a los...
aquí las tenemos. Sí.
Sí, se las enviamos a los panelistas y quien pueda responderlas.
Sí,
Perfecto.
sí. Cuauhtémoc, ¿tú los necesitas?
Disculpa, Rosario.
Ay, Cuauhtémoc, estás en, creo que...
se cambió, se me hace.
Estás en el de inglés.
Supuestamente me cambié para estar
Sí,
en el
estás
mismo
en el
canal,
inglés
pero creo que
ahora.
ustedes
A
se
ver.
cambiaron a donde estaba.
Déjame, voy al inglés.
Ah.
Ahí estás, Cuauhtémoc, ¿verdad?
Cuauhtémoc.
Ahora sí.
No, hombre, ya me fui.
Ok, creo que nos comentabas algo,
No,
Rosario.
Cuauhtémoc. No sé en qué canal está, en chino.
No, creo que estás en el original.
Pues yo
Dinos
me
si estás
fui.
en inglés o en español.
Yo me fui al inglés y no estaba. Cuauhtémoc, ahí
Estamos
estás.
los dos en español.
Quítenle Unmute
Spanglish.
Original Audio.
Estoy en el inglés.
Ah, ok, ya. Muy bien, yo también.
Ok, va.
Cuando recibí tu correo, Cuau, ya estábamos empezando las final remarks, entonces ya no me quise desconcentrar y no teníamos mucho tiempo. Pero, ¿tú necesitas las preguntas?
No, para nada, solamente como que era algo opcional, igual para reforzar, porque hubieron otras preguntas que por el tiempo no se pudieron responder.
Sí.
Entonces, como para los documentos que estamos haciendo, creo que va a ser importante ir como complemento, pero solamente era como a manera de pregunta y propuesta.
Sí, claro. Sí, te las hacemos llegar.
Sí, y pues muchas...
Cuauhtémoc es el que nos está ayudando con la relatoría, Sam.
Sí, te pasamos las preguntas, tenemos todos los...
Nomás que tú estás en otro idioma. No sé en qué idioma estás, Sam.
Samuel sí lo escuchamos, creo, ¿sí?
Ya
Bueno,
sé
¿me
que dijo
escuchan?
Gaby. Sí.
No.
Ya es que Gaby es toda una pro.
¿Aquí me escuchan? ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, ya.
Sí, perfectamente, Samuel.
Ya quité el mute.
Sí, gracias, James. Muchas gracias, James. Nos vemos. Buen trabajo, good job. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, seguimos en comunicación, descansen.
Nos vemos.
Bye.
Yo ahorita reviso ese documento, Cuauhtémoc, y te mando el link para que acceses a las preguntas.
Por supuesto. Sí, cualquier cosa, pues ya por el chat hay otros detallitos, estamos platicando, ¿vale?
Gracias.
Vale, con permiso, buenas
Ándale,
tardes.
gracias,
Bye.
buenas tardes, bye. Radu, Jerry, Adriana, Laura, Diego, José Luis, gracias. Ya dejamos de grabar, ¿verdad? En ambos idiomas, chicos.
Ujú.
dejamos el live streaming, Sam,
Espérame.
antes de que nos...
Ya.